Just a little bit of an introduction to this idea of SDG road mapping. What is an SDG roadmap? What are we talking about when we're talking about these roadmaps? Well, first of all, let's start with the SDGs themselves. I think Joe teed it up nicely, explaining the SDGs, which many of us are familiar with now, this multicolored wheel of opportunity. The key thing to note, this agenda, although it is an intergovernmental agenda put forward by the United Nations, fundamentally will not be realized without strong engagement from the private sector. Business has a critical role to play as an engine of employment, a driver of technology and innovation, a source of finance, and through its capacity to protect and promote human rights throughout global value chains. So business has a critical role to play when we think about the SDGs being realized. And one other quick note as well, in the context of the strange times in which we find ourselves, there have been calls from some quarters saying that the pandemic has thrown the 2030 agenda and the SDGs so far off track that we're never likely to recover on this road to prosperity by 2030. Shouldn't we be dropping everything else and just focusing on the pandemic? And that is indeed true. I think if we look at the level of impact that the COVID-19 pandemic has had on the SDGs, it has been substantial. A number of SDGs have been thrown significantly off course. In particular, SDGs around no poverty, zero hunger, and good health. We're looking at an extra 100 million people plus having been pushed back into extreme poverty, with poverty rising for the first time in a decade or so. We're looking at significant health impacts, not only from the pandemic itself, with 5 million people plus now having perished, but also substantial mental and physical collateral health impacts for many. And generally, this is leading to rising inequality and often hard for people to earn decent livings. And then there's also impacts on moderate levels across all the other SDGs as well, as we've suffered multiple lockdowns. Things like education have suffered, gender equality, with a lot of women having to move back into caring functions as a result of the pandemic as loved ones have become ill, et cetera, et cetera. The list goes on. So the pandemic has had a huge impact on this agenda. However, our position at the Wbcsd and shared by the UN is that this agenda is now more critical than ever before. All this talk that we hear regularly now of building back better or building forward better, even, it really should be done with the SDGs at the heart of the conversation. This is a ready-made agenda on how to move towards prosperity that's been unanimously agreed by all the United Nations member states. It's there for us to leverage as we think about moving back better. So our argument would be, despite the pandemic and the huge impact that that's had, this is the guiding star that we should be leveraging as a global community, as a global business community, in terms of building forward better. So how do we do that? The SDGs can be a complex beast to get your head around. It's not only the 17 goals themselves, but the 169 SDG targets that sit beneath those goals make this a very detailed, very prescriptive piece of work. And that's where the power lies, but that's also where the challenges lie in understanding how to leverage that work. And so we at Wbcsd built off a recommendation by the Business and Sustainable Development Commission, who produced this landmark Better Business, Better World report, who said that players in all sectors would benefit from developing detailed roadmaps to guide their sector's shift to sustainable development in line with the global goals. And we thought to ourselves, well, that's all very well and good. It's great to have a roadmap, but how would one go about building a roadmap in a robust way, avoiding accusations of what we call rainbow washing in the world of SDGs, of companies just paying lip service to this agenda without actually really fully understanding it. So how could we create something that would guide companies in terms of maximizing their potential to contribute to the SDG agenda? And so with that in mind, we developed a set of SDGs. And those guidelines follow this sort of simple structure. First of all, looking at the current position of the company, so outlining a value chain map and identifying where the sector's activities currently interact with the SDGs, and assessing where they have potential to either increase positive impacts on the SDG agenda or to decrease negative impacts on the SDG agenda. And that allows you then to look at those interactions and then establish which of your SDGs that you're looking at are priority for your sector. So that's really to understand where you currently play and which SDGs are most relevant to your industry. And then the next step is about trying to really understand where you have the potential to do more moving forward. So looking at developing a list of potential impact opportunities. Where could you do more to mitigate negative impacts and drive more positive impacts? And that's quite a lengthy and complex process and an iterative process to refine and shortlist the impact opportunities that you have there. And then once you've done that, having identified these key buckets of activity that you think are the key things that your sector can do, then trying to set short, medium, and long-term actions to advance those opportunities moving forward. And then finally, grounding all of that in an action agenda, looking at developing KPIs that can help to monitor progress, defining the baselines against which you want to measure that progress, and then implementing plans to monitor and communicate how you're doing with that agenda. So that's really the three-step process that we developed as part of this SDG sector roadmapping guidance. And that guidance has now been applied to 6 different sectors, five different sectors you see on the slide here. The chemical sector launching their roadmap in 2018. We worked with the forest sector in 2019. The electric utilities roadmap came out in March of this year, and that was followed closely by the oil and gas sector roadmap and then the tyre sector roadmap. And in each of these projects, we've worked with a quorum of around between 10 and 20 companies on each different roadmap, also with various industry associations who've come on board to help broaden the perspectives and enhance the outreach ultimately as well. And these are quite complex, quite involved pieces of work. It's not a 10-minute read. It's a substantial piece of work diving into where the sector currently interacts with the goals and setting an agenda and an action framework to maximize the sector's impact on the SDGs moving forward. And should also note as well, those are global roadmaps that we've set up over the course of the last few years. But we've also advanced this agenda at a more national level in 2019, developing the Indian cement sector roadmap, and in 2020, developing the US farmers and ranchers in action roadmap for the Sustainable Development Goals, looking at US agriculture. So a framework that can be applied at a global level, but also equally impactfully at a national level, looking at how sectors within a particular country can drive progress. So that's a bit of the background on what roadmaps are and how we develop them. I'd like to turn now to the electric utilities roadmap that was launched earlier this year, give you a little bit more information on that piece of work and how that's shaped up. So the electric utilities roadmap, we began this work a couple of years ago now. As I said, it's a complex process and lots to chew through, but we brought together a leading group of electric utility companies who are all aligned on looking for ways to explore how they could go beyond what they were just doing individually, which was substantial. All of these different companies really moving the needle in their own way on the SDGs, but how could they set a broader agenda for the sector as a whole, leveraging their individual expertise and capacity and translating that into a guiding vehicle and tool for the entire sector to leverage moving forward. And so we were very grateful for these companies for their leadership in taking that on, and the project chaired by the CEOs of Iberdrola and EDP. The first step, as harking back to our model, first step is to define your priority SDGs and how you're interacting with them. And this was the group, the collection of SDGs that the group identified as being core to their industry. You see some of the what you'd expect to be very familiar faces in terms of affordable and clean energy around SDG 7 and climate action, but also important incorporation of things like gender equality on SDG 5, decent work and economic growth around SDG 8, and SDG 15 around life on land. So a broad church of SDGs that were selected. And this was by no means to say that the other SDGs were not important. The group kept in mind that the other SDGs should be monitored and explored constantly as well. But these were the areas where the group felt that they had the biggest potential to drive impact. And the next step after that was to identify the impact opportunities, the key areas for focus where business could drive action moving forward. And these were developed across 4 different themes around climate and energy, around people and communities, around nature, and around circular economy. And the impact opportunities you see are laid out there. So firstly, we had decarbonizing electricity generation in line with limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees. Then we had enhancing electricity system flexibility, resilience, and efficiency. Under people and communities, we talked about ensuring access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern electricity services for all, attracting and retaining a diverse and inclusive workforce, and then leaving no one behind in the energy transition and respecting human rights. Under nature, we talked about protecting, restoring, and promoting sustainable use of ecosystems and driving net biodiversity gains. And then under circular economy, we talked about realizing a transition to a circular electric utility sector. So those were the key impact opportunities that were identified. But of course, all of those things relatively high level, unless you get into the detail of what needs to be done. And then that's exactly what the report goes on to do. So for each of those impact opportunities, and I've just selected a couple here for visualization purposes, but for each of those impact opportunities, we then talk about the key actions that need to take place. Those actions are linked to the relevant SDG targets. They're linked, well, we provide an assessment of the level of impact on the SDGs that particular action would have, whether it's high, medium, or low. We assess the time needed to take action on that area, whether it's short-term, long-term, mid-term. We assess whether the sector has the capacity to lead that action or whether it needs to partner with others. And we identify other stakeholder groups that will be needed to advance that action. So quite a comprehensive assessment of what is needed to drive each action forward. So just as an example here, in this area of attracting and retaining a diverse and inclusive workforce, we talk about adopting policies to promote greater diversity and inclusion, equal opportunities and equal pay for all employees, irrespective of age, gender, disability, race, ethnicity, origin, religion, or economic or other status. And then you see other actions there about providing women with equal opportunities for leadership and learning at all levels of the organization's management, et cetera, et cetera. So you can see the level of detail that the work is going into is quite advanced. Another example here around SDG, or impact opportunity 6, I should say, around protecting, restoring, and promoting sustainable use of ecosystems, etc. And again, same format, here identifying 4 different actions that can be undertaken around water stewardship, mitigating biodiversity risks and having a net positive impact, improving and increasing access to knowledge and data on the local environment, and then collaborating with various other partners to drive those approaches forward and to measure impacts. So again, detailed series of actions to accompany that broader impact opportunity piece, which really adds a clear agenda, a clear line of direction needed to realize full impact on those SDGs. And then in the space of the report as well, we also identify a number of different case studies across all of those different impact opportunities to identify where there are examples of companies already having started to take action in those areas to serve as inspiration to the broader sector. So highlighting projects that are already underway, that are already proving beneficial, that are already driving returns for the company, so that we can bring those examples and actions to life and make them more than just a list of actions on a page. So that's the overview of the electric utility sector roadmap. I'd love to go into detail of all of the 80-odd pages, but I'll leave that to you to explore. Just to say that the group of companies involved and Wbcsd are now working to operationalize that roadmap, so it's not sitting static as a report on a shelf, but the group of companies, Tata Power included, and thank you for Tata Power for their leadership throughout that piece of work, are working to create a platform to advance that now and to bring other companies together from the sector to drive impact as well. Just in closing from me, I'd like to flag another few useful resources that may be of interest in this space. So there is a compact, relatively compact overview of how to conduct a sector roadmap called the SDG Sector Roadmap Guidelines, which you can find on our website. And this really lays out the process I was explaining of how to conduct an SDG Sector Roadmap with case studies from the various roadmaps that we have produced and endorsement quotes and perspectives from the individuals that have been engaged in those processes. So please do have a look at that if you would like to learn more about the process or would like to consider conducting a roadmap for any sector that you're involved with. More broadly on the SDGs, we have developed at Wbcsd an SDG Essentials learning tool. So this is an online tool that you can use to upskill your colleagues and employees on the SDGs, why they're important, what they mean for business, and what business can do to take action. There are little quizzes embedded in this site as well. So it's a 10-minute crash course on the SDGs, basically for you and your staff. And then finally, for a bit of slightly lighter but still important interaction with the SDGs, we have developed also the Good Life Goals. So these are different actions that individuals can take in their daily lives to support the SDGs. So for each SDG, there are 5 actions that we've identified that you can take on a day-to-day basis to play your own part individually in the realization of this agenda as well. So please do check that out if you're interested. And all of our material on the SDGs is available at WBCSD's SDG Hub, so sdghub.com. There you'll find all of our resources, but also a collection of all of the other key resources in this space that we think are useful for helping you to navigate the dynamic, complex, but essential SDG area. But I'll stop there and hand back over to Joe.
Thank you very much, James. And a reminder to everyone listening, if you have any questions for James or any of our other speakers, please put them into the chat. Now we'll come to Dr. Pravir Sinha. He is the CEO and Managing Director of the Tata Power Company Limited, India's largest integrated power utility. He has more than 30 years experience of power generation and distribution professionally. And he's also a visiting research associate at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT in Boston, and is also a distinguished visiting scholar at the Faculty of Engineering and Architectural Science at Ryerson University in Canada. Dr. Sinha, I'm very glad that you can join us and please do share your perspectives.
Thank you, Joe. It's a pleasure to be participating in today's event on discussion on what should be the business action line with SDGs, and especially the focus on electric utilities. And as you rightly mentioned, the report was published by Wbcsd, and this was published on 15th March 2021, wherein there were 11 utilities globally who participated. From India, of course, Tata Power was the only utility who participated. And especially considering what has happened in the last 2 weeks in COP26 in Glasgow and the messaging that is coming from there, is that there is very little time left. And the target of 1.5 degrees centigrade or 2 degrees centigrade, we need to do many actions very quickly. And for a utility, especially considering that nearly 1/3 of the carbon emissions comes from the electric utilities, there is a much bigger responsibility and a much deeper understanding that needs to be done and action that needs to be taken. When we look at what's happening globally and what's happening in India, it's important to see that how countries and companies are talking about net zero carbon and what are the other interim steps that they are taking. Tata Power, nearly 2 years back, took a step forward and said that we need to demonstrate leadership, and that has to be by committing net zero even before India committed. And Tata Power said that we will do it before 2050. And I think we are now on track to do it, in fact, by 2045. And this is something that We feel very proud of taking the leadership position in this area. During the COP26, the Prime Minister of India made very big commitments. The first big commitment, of course, is net zero carbon by 2070. But I think the big things that he talked about in the medium term and by 2030 was talking about that 500 gigawatt of non-carbon generation. Today, the country is about 150 gigawatt, 100 gigawatt of renewable and 50 gigawatt of hydropower. And from 150 to 500 in 9 years is a huge task for a country which had been just adding 10 to 12 or 15 gigawatt per year in terms of the non-carbon generation capacity additions for the last many years. So I think a huge task which is set up, and I'm sure the Indian utility and the government and the other stakeholders will play a very important role in taking this agenda forward. It also mentioned that 50% of the energy will come from renewable sources. And I think that's a very good commitment, very aggressive commitment from the government side. And I'm sure the Mission 500 by 2030 is something which all of us will work together to implement it and demonstrate about the seriousness that India and the Indian industry believes in championing the cause of clean energy. When we look at Tata Power, we not only participated in the report that was prepared by Wbcsd, but also we have been aggressively working with various other partners, stakeholders to see that how do we drive this and drive this in our businesses. And in this regard, Tata Power took a step that what are the few SDGs that we will work very closely. And we said in business, we will work on 4 areas or the 4 SDGs towards decarbonization, how SDG 7 and 13 we can become carbon neutral and also take various other mitigation measures. We also said that we will work on thought leadership and how SDG 9 will give us the opportunity to become a global sustainability benchmark. And on the 4th one, we talked about the SDG 12, which will help us to move towards water neutrality, positivity, and zero waste to landfill. And these are the 4 pillars on which the business SDG of Tata Power has been defined. And all our actions in our businesses are being taken today to achieve this target. The other area that we said, and especially Tata Group and Tata Power has always believed, is that we also need to work on the various SDGs in our CSR area. And we identified 6 areas where we will work. And the 6 SDGs, we said, SDG 1, which is no poverty, and how do we work towards that? And how do we as an electric utility work towards that? And many of our programs, many of our initiatives are towards, whether it is the universal access of energy in villages through microgrids or the solarization of pump sets, are working towards ensuring that there is no poverty, apart from engaging very deeply with the communities to ensure that they get livelihood and poverty is removed. The second is the second SDG, which is the zero hunger. The third is the good health and well-being. The fourth is the quality education. The fifth is the SDG 6, which is clean water and sanitation. And the SDG 8, which is of decent work and economic growth. And these, again, 6 pillars mentions that how Tata Power will work towards making the CSR SDG more robust and compliant as we move forward. For India, it is very important that all the 17 SDGs are worked upon, but it is actually important to identify which are the focus SDGs. But Tata Power, the 4 business SDGs and the 6 CSR SDGs define the way that it will make its policy and implement them, and how these initiatives and programs will start benefiting the community and the people around. And I think with the great opportunities that we have, and especially the change that is going to happen globally and in India, and the technology intervention, there's something that will definitely happen. Our efforts on decarbonization, our efforts on decentralization of energy, and our efforts on using digital technology for socializing the usage of energy, I think will play a very, very pivotal role when we take forward our SDG goals implementation in this decade. This will not only align in terms of our future growth plans, where we have said very clearly that no capacity additions will happen in our coal-based investments. It will only be renewable investment. And where today we find that we have from 5 years back, when we had just 15% of our generation which was clean energy, today we are 31%, and by 2030 we will be about 75%. So all actions will be taken whereby the capacity additions and the energy additions that will take place will be in the clean energy space. Similarly, many of our other programs, especially in terms of decentralization and distributed energy, will be relating to the rooftop solar, whereby the consumer can be an industrial consumer, commercial consumer, residential consumer, will be able to generate energy and will be able to supply it also to the grid. And to that extent, they become self-sufficient in their requirement of energy. But along with that, we will be having a large-scale program for solarization of pump sets, where we again feel that along with the government programs, Tata Power will play a very, very significant role to ensure that how do we empower the farmers and give them the opportunity to use the distributed generation at the village level, so that the pump sets that they are using are solarized and they have a much better yield and economic activity around that. The last area, of course, is our huge initiative that we are taking, and the world's biggest microgrid program, setting up nearly 10,000 microgrids in villages, which is expected to impact nearly 25 million people, not only in providing them universal access of energy, but also in providing them the economic activities that they can carry out. And I think all these put together will really change the way the energy can be produced and utilized right up to the village level. Along with many of these initiatives, our other programs are on various energy solutions. The EV charging, whereby seamless experience will be provided to customers who are using electric vehicles, so that the mobility moves towards clean energy mobility, and the pollution that we are seeing, especially in cities and especially in the winter months, when we find that most of our cities are having huge pollution levels, that will go a very long way in reducing the pollution levels in the city, considering that India has one of the most number of cities with very high pollution levels globally. Along with the home automation solution and the ESCO services, the optimized usage of energy is very, very important. And how do you give the opportunity to the consumers to optimize the usage of energy? And to that extent, it will help them in managing their energy requirements, especially when we are talking of distributed energy. And many of these solutions that Tata Power is now working on will go a long way in not only ensuring that we go for clean energy, but also in ensuring that we only use energy when it is required and the wastage of energy can be reduced. So I think we strongly believe that over a period of time, the leadership that Tata Power is demonstrating will help us as a utility in India to take forward the agenda of clean energy, and our commitments that we have set for ourselves to meet the SDG roadmaps will be implemented. So once again, my best wishes to all who have joined today's program. And I'm looking forward to a very engaging discussion today and hearing many of the experts who are there on what are the best practices, how we can benchmark, and how we can take forward the agenda of clean energy and an agenda for providing to our, especially to our utilities, power utilities. It's been not only taking the SDG goals, but also implementing them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sinha. And very strong messages there around first wanting to and indeed taking a leadership position on the SDGs and recognizing that collaboration was going to be very important in realizing that leadership position. And I think an interesting segmentation, these 4 core business SDGs for you as a utility, and then the 6 more philanthropic SDGs for you as a responsible corporation in an emerging market. Quite an interesting segmentation there. But then also how you see your engagement with these SDGs as central to your growth strategy, the transformation of how you're generating, distributing power and how it's being consuming. So that's really useful. Thank you, Dr. Sinha. Okay, so we have 2 more speakers now, one from government and one from research. So we have Dr. B.N. Patil and we have Dr. Viva Devon. And first, I'd like to invite Dr. B.N. Patil, who is the CEO of Zilla Parishad of Jalgaon in Maharashtra. He's a climate change expert, has a doctorate in the subject, and has held various positions at the government of Maharashtra. So we'd like to hear from you, sir, and then after that we'll hear from Dr. Devon from the Energy and Resources Institute. But first, if Dr. Patil, if you're there, please, if you could just in 8 or 9 minutes, if that's possible, share your perspectives from government on SDGs and the role of utilities.
Good afternoon, everybody. Dignitaries present in the meet, World Bank representatives, Tata Power officials, and my friends. So I will cover climate change, its action plan, and how it is related to sustainable development goals through state government as well as our central government. We know that the history that humanity has always and will always adapt to climate, whether to move to best place suitable to support their culture and most important is livelihood needs. However, world temperatures are rising because of anthropogenic activities, and we certainly now know that climate change now threatens every aspect of human life. We have now significantly realized that if we don't act now, nature and humans will have to face catastrophic warming with worsening droughts, greater sea level rise, and mass extinction of species globally. We face a huge challenge of increase in extreme events locally. Extreme rainfall coupled with floods in human settlements and lives, loss of agricultural land and crops, landslides due to deforestation and unplanned development, prolonged droughts, uneven rainfall patterns, heat waves, and cloud burstings are becoming common events. We now know that the rapid climate change we are experiencing currently is caused by excessive use of oil, gas, and coal, and maybe at homes, factories, transport, and release of greenhouse gases trap the sun's heat and cause the planet's temperature to rise. As a result of this, the world is now about 1.2 degrees Celsius warmer than it was in the 19th century, and the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere has risen by 50%. Temperature rises must slow down if we want to avoid the worst consequences of climate change. For that, global warming needs to be kept to 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2100. However, unless the further action is taken, the planet could still warm by more than 2 degrees Celsius by the end of this century. A report in the 2021 by Climate Action Trackers states that The world is heading for 2.4 degrees Celsius of warming by the end of the century. If nothing is done, scientists think global warming could exceed 4 degrees Celsius in the future, leading to devastating heat waves, millions losing their homes to rising sea levels, and irreversible loss of plant and animal species. Extreme weather events are already more intense, threatening lives and livelihoods. With further warming, some regions could become uninhabitable as farmland turns into desert. Coastal communities in Maharashtra are already endangered, and even for those with the resources to take action, the speed and the nature of climate change has made it difficult to adapt. Poorer people will suffer the most as they do not have the money to adapt the climate change. Globally, countries agree that climate change can only be tackled by working together. And in a landmark agreement in Paris in 2015, they pledged to try to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. A new global agreement, the Glasgow Climate Pact, was reached at the COP26 summit. It aims to reduce the worst impacts of climate change. The agreement, although not legally binding, will set the global agenda on climate change for the next decade. Many countries have pledged to get to net zero by 2050. This means reducing greenhouse gases emissions as much as possible and balancing out remaining emissions by absorbing an equivalent amount from the atmosphere. For the first time at a COP conference, there was an explicit plan to reduce use of coal, which is responsible for 40% of annual CO2 emissions in a phased down manner. The agreement pledged to significantly increase the money to help poor countries cope with effects of climate change and make the switch to clean energy. There is also a prospect of $1 trillion a year fund from 2025, after a previous pledge for richer countries to provide $100 billion a year by 2020 was missed. Financial organizations controlling $100 trillion agreed to back clean technology such as renewable energy and direct finance away from fossil fuel burning industries. The initiative is an attempt to involve private companies in meeting net zero targets. World leaders agreed to phase out subsidies that artificially lower the prices of coal, oil, or natural gas. However, no firm dates have been set for this target. Leaders from more than 100 countries, with about 85% of world's forests, promised to stop deforestation by 2030. This is seen as vital as trees absorb vast amount of CO2 and also provide support and livelihood to poor people who are living in the forest. Similar initiatives haven't stopped deforestation, but this one is better funded. A scheme to cut 30% methane emissions by 2030 was agreed by more than 100 countries. Methane is currently responsible for a third human-generated warming, though it has a short lifespan. So, to achieve these targets, it will require governments, businesses, and individuals to make big changes. A small change in our lives can also help limit our impact on climate change. Like if we take fewer flights or leave a car free or use electric or solar bicycles, develop a car culture of carpooling through electric cars, or adopt a tree or develop small dense patches of forest wherever possible. Take care of your own garbage, recycle, reuse of water, use renewable energy source for home, or buy energy efficient products such as washing machines when they need replacing. Switch from a gas heating system to solar heating system. Insulate your homes. So at the COP26, if we see, India pledged to cut emissions to net zero by 2070, reduce carbon emissions by 1 million tons by 2030, and raise the share of renewables in the energy mix to 50% among others. As the energy secure future is essential for India's economy, which is recovering from pandemic while also battling sluggish growth. By 2030, India will reduce the emission intensity of its economy by 45%. That's of all greenhouse gases, not just CO2. A more ambitious target than the previous goal of 33 to 35% cut in its emission intensity from the 2005 level by 2030. So union government policies and schemes like FAME 1 and FAME 2, the PLI scheme and the scrappage policy encourages the use of electric vehicles and incentivizes manufacturers. About 50% of Indian states have state policies for promoting the use of electric vehicles. Concessions to users include financial subsidy on purchase of exemption from road tax or registration charges and low interest rates on loans. So initiatives for bulk purchasing of electric vehicles for public sector or personal and public transport entities and last mile delivery operators is also included in the policy. So infrastructure development for battery and vehicle manufacturing, especially charging infrastructure and scrapping centers, is also a part of the policy. So Maharashtra has also published its e-vehicle policy and offers subsidy up to Rs 2,50,000. Further, Maharashtra state has its own climate change policy adopted in the year 2017. This policy promises or it promotes uses of more renewable energy. This comprises of solar water pumps for agriculture uses as well as for drinking water supply schemes, solar water heaters for daily use for daily bathing or daily heat water requirement, solar rooftops, PV panels, net metering to promote use of renewable energy. These are the major initiatives as far as energy sector is concerned. So Maharashtra has also started My Earth campaign, that is Majhi Vasundhara campaign, through which it involves implementation of micro action plan at the local or village level. It integrates the sustainable development goals. So to address most of the goals through this My Earth campaign, which is at the local level, because we need actions at the local level and policies at the global level. For following that, this campaign addresses issues of the poverty, issues of the education, then how to improve their income, how to improve their alternate livelihoods, or increase their capacity so that they can develop good resilience to adapt the climatic changes. So this also includes change in cropping pattern, so that if small landholders or small farmers, if they don't adjust to the changing rainfall pattern, they lose their crop. So we are also promoting through the various policies or through convergence, so to change in the cropping pattern or even from crops to horticulture pattern, big or timber cultivation, so that it will also increase green cover. It will also increase more resilience to the farmers, and it will also generate alternate livelihood to the poor sectors. This provides, mostly these all policies we are targeting at the rural areas through convergence. So it may be central Mahatma Gandhi Rural Development, this thing, Employment Guarantee Scheme. It may cover the catchment treatment in the forest areas or agriculture areas. It also covers the recharging of the wells, recharging of the lakes or ponds or farm ponds. And in these farm ponds, we also encouraging them to have fisheries, so that online fisheries will also fetch them good income. So development of farm ponds, water and soil conservation programs have been planned and implemented in the state as per the requirement of sustainable development goals. So climate action can be vehicle to deliver a dignity if we plan it properly with a micro plan. So opportunity and equality for all sectors of the people will also cover equal chance of development, equal chance of resilience development, so to cope with the climatic changes. Journey to net zero could be like invest in people's climatic efforts while prioritizing our 17 sustainable development goals. And this involves integration of various schemes like from improvement in the nourishment or improvement in the housing schemes, so that they should have proper houses to get protection from the extreme events from the climate change. Or this is actually a blueprint, I would say, of interlinking global goals to develop resilience and to protect peoples and warming Earth. So green industrial revolution going to happen to keep 1.5 target. We all know that. So COP signals the end of polluting vehicles to reduce the emission, and every sector is going to be a green at rapid speed because investors is cautious and aware of the climate risk. So once investor is aware of the climate risk, so entire game is going to change. He will see his investment is protected. He will see his investment is going in the green projects. So there is so much scope for even government or your companies or corporates to invest or to change their vision into green economy and green businesses. That gives a big new way or new future plan for the corporates also. Even for at the state level planning, we have changing development rules for cities and all, so that low-lying areas, the flood-prone areas, new development should not happen, or existing development, how we can develop resilience to these housings, that is also incorporated in the policies. I extend my thank again to Tata Power and World Bank for giving me this opportunity to present my opinion and views. Thanks again.
Thank you very much, Dr. Patil. And it was interesting to hear you speak not only of how urgent action is required, but also how it's across all sectors and all aspects of our life. And you interlinked climate action with action on nature and equity. And you spoke about how these things were all interconnected, and also bringing in the importance of the investor community as well. So thank you very much. We're getting some questions in. Thanks for that. We will do our best to come to them. I'm very pleased now to invite Dr. Viva Devon. We're a few minutes behind. My apologies, and also with my apology, a request to keep your remarks brief if you can. Dr. Devon is the Director General of the Energy and Resources Institute, an incredibly well-known and respected research center based in India, but known around the world. She's a fellow of the National Academy of Sciences India and has been actively involved in research and policy development at both national and international level. She holds professorships internationally too, but in the interest of time, Dr. Devon, I'm just going to hand over to you here. Thank you. Oh, you're on mute. We can see you well, but you're on mute. Yeah.
Thank you so much for giving the introduction. And I do realize we are running behind schedule. Well, really speaking, if we look at the clean and affordable energy access is a lever to sustainable economic growth and social equity. And India, as a country, we are poised to add 3% electricity demand annually. And it is that the development has to take place, and people's aspirations are also going to go up. So while we have to ensure that, we are also very conscious that we need to be clean as far as possible. And our Prime Minister has definitely shown the way to the world by making such strong commitments, which also puts a lot of pressure on electric distribution utilities and so on. It's also that in the last couple of years, it is also that the target of every village to be electrified with 100% electrification, the transition towards clean energy becomes all the more important. Now, when we look at SDG 7, it encompasses measures aiming to ensure clean energy access, energy efficiency, and renewable, like 50% renewables by 2030. And at COP also, the increased commitment of India that in a way showed the way to the world. Like we are talking about energy-based capacity to 500 gigawatts by 2030. And that shows that there is a lot of demand and commitment for renewable energy. We are also looking at the economic growth. And it was said earlier also that Maharashtra is moving towards e-mobility as far as possible. And that is the entire country perhaps is moving in that direction. We are also looking at the space conditioning, which is going to grow. and renewables will play a very important role. There is also consciousness in terms of enhancing energy efficiency, be it the industrial, commercial, agriculture, residential sector. So everywhere that commitment or consciousness is coming. And there is also studies going on the management programs that there are, how can you reduce the peaks and lean periods, and how can we influence the behavioral patterns of the consumers. Now, Terry's study suggested that by 2030, integration of renewables can be achieved at no extra system cost as renewables with storage becomes a cheap competitor. Hence, utilities need to play a proactive role in optimizing their power procurement portfolio by promoting the large-scale deployment of clean technologies and other allied storage technologies. Moving away from conventional fuels should be a just and equitable one. Throughout the transition process, social inclusion issues will therefore require the recognition, inclusion, and empowerment of a diverse range of stakeholders. If we look at the world's progress so far on 2030 agenda, the Global Sustainable Development Report 2020, on the progress on implementation of 2030 agenda continues to be slow and disproportionate, with rising inequalities within and among countries. In some areas, the progress has either stalled or even been reversed because it was listed that how the COVID has impacted negatively all over. The innovation for sustainability pathways to an efficient and effective post-pandemic future states that the world is not on track to achieve the majority of aspirational and ambitious SDG goals. While the world's inadequate efforts and slow progress have further resulted in negative health impacts of COVID-19, which in turn has cascading social and economic impacts. The pandemic has not just made it challenging to achieve 2030 agenda going forward, but even it threatened to arrest or reverse the progress made on the SDGs since 2015. If we look at India's Voluntary National Review 2020 report, Decade of Action, taking SDGs from global to local, presented at the 2020 High-Level Political Forum, embodies the country's commitment towards localization of the SDGs, representing a paradigm shift in its approach to implementing the SDGs from whole of government to whole of society, engaging with and reflecting perspective of all relevant stakeholders from central to local. The country's 2020 VNR recognizes and acknowledges industry's contribution in the country's progress towards achieving SDGs so far, and the significant role that businesses are playing in this decade of action. And I was really compliment Tata Power, because they always, Tatas, they take the leadership role. And before the government came up with their policies, they were already implementing it. And I'm sure that the Prime Minister's commitment was basically based on the trust that the industries would follow. And for industries also, it is that there is commitment on part of the government. So sooner or later, they will have to follow that path. The role of private sector, surely it's very critical to achieve economic growth, poverty reduction, and taking country towards sustainability in the post-COVID world. To leverage the opportunities posed by the COVID-19 crisis, the industry need to rescale and recalibrate its model and come out with more resilient business models, viewing long-term resilience through the SDG lens. Integrating the key elements of sustainability the SDGs provide a holistic framework for businesses to look at the socio-economic and environmental issues and ways to internalize them in order to prioritize their sustainability action and goals. And that's both in the interest of equitable growth of the society and also sustainable growth of the business itself. Accounting for these externalities in planning and business models can improve companies' competitiveness, reduce environmental degradation, and enhance human well-being. TERI's work with 7 industry sectors in India, including ICT, automobile, oil and gas, chemicals, engineering, cement, and the power sector in partnership with the National Foundation for Corporate Governance, MOCA, GOI, on enhancing the role of businesses towards achieving the SDGs in India, underscores the need and relevance of SDGs to enhance and accelerate business action on sustainability in today's time. TERI's discussion paper, SDGs still remain relevant for accelerating focused sustainability actions by Indian businesses, articulate a call for action for Indian businesses to act on SDGs, particularly in the post-COVID world. By means of its 7 key messages, it highlights the need to apply the SDG lens while evaluating business strategy and actions, illustrate how the SDGs can be used by business to design focused sustainability actions, and demonstrate the results that may be achieved when companies embrace and fully integrate the SDGs into their business strategy and actions. One of the key issues identified is establishing linkages between organizational goals and the national priorities, and a ready reckoner on the strategy and implementation part for gauging their contribution to SDGs. The call for action is aligning sustainability actions with SDGs in retrospective is predominant than being strategic. And insight is that a uniform policy may be necessary to ensure that a consistent and transparent form of disclosures is practiced in the long run. Various forms of reporting frameworks, both voluntary and
recording in progress.
And board of directors to view such alignment with SDGs through a strategic lens rather than a compliance exercise. The action point 2.
If I could just ask you just to finish in 1 minute. Thank you.
Okay. So I'll just like to say that there are a number of companies like Shri Cement, BPCL. So there are a number of companies which have taken this very seriously, Indus Tower, their CSR and so on. And it is being seen that SDGs incorporates materiality assessment will lead to credibility and completeness. So I won't do any further. Maybe what I'll do is I'll put whatever I have prepared, and then listeners can have access to it. So thank you very much.
You.
I know we are late.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Devon, and that would be a big help. And thanks for sharing with us the reminder that the electricity demand it's a growth scenario here in India, but that all around the world, this interface of climate, technology, regulation, and finance is transforming how power is being generated and distributed, and bringing it back to the importance of social issues, the just transition, which is, I think, a strong reminder of why the SDGs are a crucial framework. It's not just the Paris Agreement, but factoring in the social dimension, which the SDGs do, bringing together these 3 themes of climate, nature, and equity. Thanks for sharing your work with sectors nationally, and also for emphasizing this point about the growing importance of disclosures to investors and to other stakeholders who are looking for good quality information on SDG performance. Questions are coming in and they're being answered, and this is going to help us with time. So there's already a question on EVs has been answered in the chat. Dr. Patil, there's a question for you, but if you're able to answer it in the chat, that will help us with time. I would now like to introduce our last speaker for this session, Ms. Shloka Nath, who currently leads the Sustainability and Policy and Advocacy portfolios at the Tata Trusts, which is one of India's leading philanthropic foundations. She's also the acting CEO of the India Climate Collaborative, which is an India-led platform that's more than 3 years old now, founded by a group of philanthropies interested in continuing to accelerate India's development while also exceeding its climate goals. She's got a very impressive and varied background in media, in philanthropy, and it's a pleasure to have you address this group. Shloka, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Joe, and hello, everyone, and thank you to Tata Power. I'm actually a big fan of Dr. Sinha and his leadership in the electric utilities space, and thank you, of course, Joe, and the World Business Council for Sustainable Development for inviting me to speak today. It's actually an honor to be here with all of you. Joe mentioned the ICC, and I think just to tell you a little bit more about ourselves, we're actually a first of its kind initiative to increase climate ambition in the country. And we've been homegrown by some of India's most preeminent businesses and philanthropic leaders, including, of course, the Tata Trust. And we function as a collaborative, bringing together really diverse voices in the climate ecosystem. We hope to increase investment in climate solutions, and we're looking to build a really strong climate narrative for the nation. And I think our mandate as a collaborative actually reflects in our audience today. All of you who represent different sectors, interests, and contributions, you're all puzzle pieces, really, that together make a larger movement. And as isolated players, our efforts, remain incomplete. It's only when we come together and we can leverage each other's strengths that we can overcome very stubborn systemic crises, be it climate change or decarbonization of the electric utilities sector. But to start with, I want to talk to you a little bit more about the Sustainable Development Goals. You've heard a great deal from our other panelists today. But the SDGs were adopted by the UN in 2015. It was a universal call to end poverty, to protect the planet, and of course, to ensure that all people enjoy peace and prosperity by 2030. And SDGs 11 to 15, as you may know, include things like responsible consumption and production, climate action, life on land and water, sustainable cities. All of the things that we classically identify as related to the health of our planet and to climate change. But the truth is that separation is actually a fallacy, because for the entirety of modern humanity, we've actually lived in and relied on a stable climate to enable us to focus on advancing our own species. I would compare it to Maslow's pyramid of our needs, or even the yogic philosophy of chakras. Unless we satisfy the basic need of food, water, and shelter, represented either by the base of the pyramid or the Muladhara or Root chakra, we can't actually advance to higher states of intellectual awareness. And the SDGs focused on good health, on eradicating hunger, on maintaining peace and justice. These are actually all compromised by shifting climatic patterns that drive natural disasters and food shortages. So that's the first and most important point I want to make, that we depend on a stable climate to live with any semblance of perceived normalcy. Second, decent work and economic growth is actually really tied into climate action as well. Not only because of the point I stated earlier of needing a stable climate to support a functioning economy, but also by the opportunities presented by green solutions. So according to a recent UN policy brief on the interlinkages between energy and jobs, solar PV could actually create twice or more than twice the number of jobs per unit of electricity generation compared with coal or natural gas. Similarly, circular economy models, especially through recycling, generate far more employment than landfilling waste. And so this is really key for a country with a large and young population as India. And these green pathways actually offer a better quality of life to their workers as well. So I truly see climate action as a lens through which we can view the SDGs and development as a whole, rather than as a siloed category. Last week, many of you will know and are aware of the fact that more than 130 heads of state and government, thousands of diplomats met over the last 2 weeks at Glasgow for COP26 to set new targets for cutting emissions from burning coal, oil, and gas that are heating the planet. The United Nations have said that they want to keep hope alive of constraining global temperatures to under 1.5 degrees Celsius compared with levels before the Industrial Revolution. And that's the threshold beyond which scientists say the dangers of global warming, whether it's deadly heat waves or water shortages or crop failures and ecosystem collapse, really grow immensely. So every fraction of degree warming, the world will see more intense heat waves and drought and more deadly floods and wildfires. And India, of course, announced a new set of climate action targets at the COP26 summit in Glasgow. And these new pledges go significantly beyond our current nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement. They will provide an overall guiding signal to every branch of government and regulatory certainty to every sector of industry. So to reach these targets, we do need to talk about the power sector. Power is arguably one of the most important sectors to decarbonize over the next decade. It accounts for nearly 40% of energy emissions, the most of any sector, and rapid decarbonization is needed not just to address these emissions, but to support the transition of other sectors to net zero. However, as the current surge in energy prices highlights, electricity is also key to social and economic development. A net zero power sector should be resilient and able to supply affordable electricity. So this transition to net zero constitutes really an unparalleled opportunity for power companies and investors alike. To decarbonize electricity generation in line with the 1.5 degree scenario, the utility sector must transform by implementing existing greenhouse gas emissions mitigation solutions for electricity generation and innovating to develop new ones. According to the International Energy Agency, from 2030 onwards, at least $2 trillion of annual investments in generation and infrastructure will be required to achieve net zero and to meet rapidly growing demands for electricity. Alongside an overhaul in company strategies, of course, policy support is going to be key to creating a market environment where electric utilities can build a business case for their investment decisions. So effective public policies are needed to create the appropriate incentives to reduce fossil fuel-based generation and to rapidly increase investment in renewable generation, storage, as well as network infrastructure. So clear nationwide deadlines and incentives are of critical importance as policymakers look to accelerate the phase out of coal. India is looking at multiple policy level interventions to enable this transition through its nationally determined contributions, as I mentioned. And latest in the series, of course, is the intent to set up a 10 gigawatt of ingot to module manufacturing capacity within 2 years. Under a production-linked incentive scheme, the government will reward manufacturers for building vertically integrated PV production lines. So as we chart a pathway towards a net zero future and a phase down of coal-based power systems, it's also really important to consider the societal implications of this transition. In this rapidly evolving landscape, companies, investors, and policymakers must also deliver a just transition. It's crucial that pathways to phasing out or phasing down unabated fossil fuel generation strike a balance between decarbonization and avoiding negative impacts on people and communities. Electric utilities companies have a responsibility to ensure reliable and equitable access to electricity to consumers and to safeguard the interests of workers by skilling and reskilling programs. Overall, assistance to companies, workers, communities, and suppliers is key to attracting long-term public support and legitimacy for a rapid transition. Furthermore, scaling up sustainable finance mechanisms is necessary to facilitate that transition or that transformation. And a co-benefit of that we're going to see, of course, is mitigation of air pollution from fossil fuel combustion, the resulting improved health outcomes. And globally coordinated action in the power sector is needed at pace and at scale in the next decade in order to reach a net zero economy. Without this transformation in the global power sector, this goal will be out of reach. So recognizing this need for a global transformation and collaboration, Wbcsd, of course, has convened 11 of the world's leading electric utility companies to explore, to articulate, to set this course to realizing the unique potential of the sector, to leverage its influence, and of course, its innovation to contribute to the SDG agenda. So this new roadmap for electric utilities really provides utility business leaders worldwide with a flagship guide to driving transformative change. It's exploring the sector's interaction with the SDGs, identifying 9 priority goals, and it outlines
key impact opportunity areas where the sector is well placed to drive transformation in line with the objectives of the SDGs. Each of these is impact, opportunity for impact, and it's underscored by a series of tangible actions that companies can take to maximize their potential for positive SDG impacts across short, medium, and long-term horizons. So I'll conclude today with SDG 17, really, the partnership for goals, the essence of the ICC, the work we're doing at the Tata Trust, and of course, today's session. At the ICC, our mission is to bring together siloed stakeholders to formulate climate solutions that cross sectoral boundaries and really reinvent the systems we've depended on for hundreds of years. And that's really going to require us to work collaboratively because that is the lighthouse, to shift conversations, to bring people together in a direction towards positive change. And that's really what today's session intends to do. We have all the tools we need to build a better future, but we do need to work together. So with that, I will thank you again for inviting me to speak. Thank you for listening. And Joe, over to you.
Thank you very much, Shloka, for everything you said, but in particular for highlighting the importance of supportive policies to enable the change that at the pace it's required. And it's a really important reminder, the SDGs, 169 targets, they're time-bound, we can measure them, and companies setting out where they see their responsibilities and their opportunities and what they plan to do as sectors is a really good way to engage with government in constructive, transparent dialogue about kind of policies that can help them get there quicker. So thank you for that. I'd like to thank all the speakers for your contributions, and in particular the team of Dr. Pravir Sinha, who are answering the questions in the chat. Thank you very much for that. In the interest of time, we'll continue to answer them in the chat. Also, Dr. Patil has answered the question for him in the chat. So because of time, please keep putting your questions in the chat and we will answer them there. A big thank you to all the speakers of this first session. We're going to take a 60-second break so that people can refill their glasses of water. And then we're going to come back for a panel discussion on exactly what the solutions and strategies are that electric utilities can deploy to seize the opportunities, manage the risks, and build their license to operate, especially around the SDGs. So 60 seconds. Big thanks to everyone so far, and we'll come back for the next session. Okay, thank you.
Recording stopped.
Okay.
Recording in progress.
Great. So first of all, welcome back. My apologies to everyone. We are about 7 minutes late. I request our speakers to help us make this time back. It's our fault at Wbcsd for bringing too many speakers with lots of content to share on this big agenda. So, my apologies for that. This next session is going to focus on the, I beg your pardon, is going to focus on the solutions and strategies that electric utilities can deploy. And to take us through this discussion, we have Jyoti from Tata Power. So thanks, Jyoti, for agreeing to moderate this session. So Jyoti Bansal is an engineer, an MBA alumnus, who has a long career in media, where she's built brands and agencies, and she joined Tata Power as the custodian of their sustainability and CSR and branding agenda. And so we're really pleased to have Jyoti moderate this next panel. So Jyoti, over to you.
Thank you very much. Sorry, can you hear me? Joe, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Joe, are you able to hear me?
Yes, we have a bit of an echo.
Is it on mute or not? Yes, please. Yeah, do that. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Okay, no problem. I think the echo is gone.
Am I audible and clear now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. And yes, we will try to get the lost time back. A warm welcome to our fellow panelists, Mr. Eduardo Maura, Mr. Vinay Pritesh, Dr. Ganesh Das, and Mikkel. Very happy to have you here with us. I'll just do a very brief introduction of our panelists, and then we will get on. So we have with us Mr. Eduardo Maura from EDP. He's the Deputy Director of Sustainability at the EDP Group, and he manages supply chain strategy, human rights, social investment, and the UN SDG goals for his organization. EDP is a Portuguese electric utility company, and it is recognized as the world's most sustainable electric utility. So we are looking forward to hearing from Eduardo about their experience in getting there. Also, Portugal is probably one of the few countries which is on its way to becoming coal-free as early as within a year from now. So we will be talking to Eduardo about that also. We have Dr. Ganesh Das, who's the Chief Strategy, Collaborations and R&D for Tata Power's Delhi distribution arm. And he is the CEO of the Clean Energy International Incubation Center. Dr. Das brings with him a rich experience of more than 33 years. He has founded and headed the Smart Grid Group and rolled out India's first advanced metering infrastructure and a comprehensive smart grid technology roadmap for the Tata Power Delhi operations. We are going to be talking to him about how innovation and technology is going to be critical towards achieving the SDG Roadmap, which is critical to our existence as the human race over the next many decades. We have Mr. Vinay Pritesh. He's the Chief Financial Officer of JSW Energy. JSW is a large player in the India energy sector, and it operates in the transmission, generation, and trading sectors. There also, I think one thing which I found very interesting was that JSW sees itself as a part of the solution and not as a part of the problem. And I think that's what we are here to do today. We have Mikkel Ortiz de Latero with us from Acciona. He is the Director, Environment, Social Compliance, Health and Safety and Quality for Acciona. Acciona is a Spanish multinational, and it's leading the corporate fight to mitigate the effect of climate emergency and accelerate change towards a decarbonized energy state. It produces 21 terawatts of renewable energy a year. So I think some of the learnings which Mikkel will bring to us from the conversation will be interesting for all of us to know. So with that, I will open the panel and request Eduardo to please start off with a few opening remarks before we get into some specific questions which we are very keen to hear his views on.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I've learned very much this morning, the part I have participated. And I think the main question we have over the table is to get a full picture of the challenge ahead has, a full picture that is shared by every country and by every company. The major question is about looking at our common roadmap and try to leverage progress on that and accelerate our decisions in order to achieve our common goal. This is a very relevant topic because I feel that our days, we really became operating as a global world. And the global world is based now on common problems, on a globalized economy, and we are becoming really one. So my first words are about let us take our common agenda and work based on goals and strategy. As said before, it's not anymore the time for compliance. That it is not enough. Now it's time for targets and moving very fast to achieve our common goals. Thank you.
Thank you, Eduardo. I would like to request Vinay to please put his opening remarks to the audience before we move on.
Yeah, very good afternoon to everybody and some of the colleagues in a different time zone. At the very outset, on behalf of JSW Energy, I would like to applaud the efforts that have been taken by all the 11 member companies and Wbcsd and all the other stakeholders involved in this report. And, I believe this is going to give a focus and framework to all the electric utility companies to channelize the efforts towards contribution towards the SDGs. As Jyoti was saying in the opening remarks, JSW Energy, we are the energy vertical of JSW Group, and we are present across large chunks of the value chain of the power generation business. And interestingly, as I was reading the report and reflecting from our point of view, I was reassured that, we are not off the track. I'm happy that, the priority SDGs that have been identified by Wbcsd and the member companies are exactly in line with those that we had identified and we had been working on. So just as part of the opening remarks, one of the points that I would like to make out is this, that one of the areas that we identified is decarbonized generation and how that is going to be very, very important. If you look at our portfolio today, we are about 30% of our current portfolio comprises of green, but 70% is fossil fuel based. Earlier this year, we committed to becoming carbon neutral by 2050. And in our journey towards achieving the same, we have signed up the commitment letter under the Science Based Targets Initiative, or SBTI, for the business ambition for 1.5 degrees centigrade. Those targets are under validation by SBTI, and we hope to receive the approval at the earliest. This target is in line with the Paris Agreement. Secondly, as part of the UN high-level dialogue on energy, JSW Energy has submitted the energy compacts in the first cycle. And since affordable clean energy is a prerequisite for achieving all of the SDGs and the Paris Agreement, actions defined in the energy compact can be directly linked to the NDCs. So as a company, we have set a vision of getting to a 10 gigawatt total installed capacity by 2025, by when the share of renewables in our overall portfolio will increase to 2/3 from the current 30%. And by 2030, we want to get to a 20 gigawatt installed capacity, by when the share of renewables would increase to almost 85%. So this is the energy transition story that we as a company are trying to do. And once again, my compliments to the team at Wbcsd and the 11 member companies for coming out with this report. Thank you.
Thanks, Vinay. Mikkel, thank you very much for joining us. Your company is doing some stellar work in this field. So would you please like to open the session for us on their behalf?
Thank you very much, Jyoti. Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you again to Wbcsd for arranging for the report and also this debate. For me, the opening remarks are based on two words: urgency and regeneration. Urgency because we are probably the first generation in human history to realize the effects of climate change. And we are probably the last one that can do something about it to avoid these effects to be irreversible. And regeneration because following on what Eduardo was saying, is not the time for compliance. We need to do more, and we need to go beyond neutrality. We need to regenerate these effects to make sure that we revert and go back to a sustainable society. This is why we started 30 years ago in our renewable energy model, vertically integrated, and we believe this is the way we need to do, and fully support, therefore, the urgency spirit that the report is sending to the utility world. Thank you.
Thank you, Mikkel. Dr. Das, you've been doing a lot of work in the technology space in the sector, and taking on from what Mikkel said about urgency, technology is definitely going to be very, very critical to accelerate that path for us. So over to you for starting off from your side.
Thank you, Jyoti. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you all. Yes, it is a very critical area. Technology plays a very big role. And if you look at the energy sector or electricity utility sector per se, it is something which touches everyone, right from the poorest of the poor to the richest of the rich. So it covers a huge kind of space and hardly leaves anybody out of the blanket. So once you are dealing with such a very diverse requirement wherein the affordability is very, very polarized. So how do we really handle this kind of a situation? And where does the sustainability as a strategy come in? That becomes very critical to work around that. And if you look at the sustainable development goals, it becomes really difficult to look at all 17 of them together. So it's important to prioritize. So we need to, look at them, map the goals, prioritize, and then probably create a roadmap. And while we create this roadmap, it's important to understand that some of the SDGs are going to be the lead ones and some are going to be the lag ones. So how do we really figure out that where to focus on? So from the deployment standpoint and from the real strategy standpoint, we look at a couple of them. For instance, innovation, the industry partnership infrastructure, the partnership associated with that and collaboration is something which we work around. And then it gives us something like a lead opportunity to do something, and then where the effect is kind of translated into a clean power or climate change, etc. So all those SDGs are covered through that. So while we are doing that, the criticality is that when we are developing the ecosystem, what kind of an innovation ecosystem we are trying to create? Is it going to be a sustainable one, or it's going to be something which is going to be a one-off kind of a thing? So it is very important for the innovation to be very dynamic, and it is important it to be sustainable, and then kind of covering the entire ecosystem for the utility. And through, we have found that industry partnership collaboration is very important, because it is very difficult to do everything on your own. It's phenomenally different. The canvas is huge. You require resources. Everything costs money. You have to make sure that the affordability of the electricity is there while we are deploying new technologies. At the same time, the effect on the climate is also reduced to the minimum. So how do we really work around that? So industry partnership is very important. The symbiotic relationship we have with different industries is to be looked at, kind of explored very consciously. I can even make a statement that tomorrow's industrial park could be totally a symbiotic park where the very little wastage is going to come out. Electricity is used at an efficient manner. The byproduct which is generated out of electricity, be it biomass or anything, is used in such a fashion, kind of supporting the circular economy, that it is quite symbiotic. And then the academia also plays a very important role while we are doing that. So academia, role of academia, because it helps us to make the new product development very affordable and come out with very novel ideas. It is unique on that. And the startup ecosystem, perhaps smaller companies integrating the startup ecosystem into the utility larger value chain framework is also extremely important. I'll stop here. More discussion maybe. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Das. And I think that's good sort of segue for us to pose our first question to Eduardo. So you've been part of the development of the roadmap along with 10 other global electric utilities. Also, you're part of a company which is on an accelerated path to becoming coal-free very early, maybe within the next year or so. We would like to know what have been your learnings during the development of the roadmap, and how are you at EDP working towards actualizing this roadmap? And then I think we'll follow it up with the quick coal-free roadmap that your country is on.
Okay. Maybe starting by one aspect of your question. When we discussed under this project, the group, every company that shared opinions and developed the roadmap, we faced a huge difficulty. We need to speak about problems and difficulties. And the major one was about being prescriptive, or in the opposite way, setting goals and give companies the opportunity to select what fits best is situation. Okay, this is a very relevant question. For instance, if we discussed if we should write something about commanding the abatement of power plants as mandatory, coal-fired power plants. Well, it depends on country policies, on the level of the access to energy, the grid maturity or technology, and so on and so on. So there are a lot of topics that must be analyzed and organized and comprehended together. A major conclusion. So,
recording in progress.
And ethical aspects of the supply chain, leaving no one behind. So let's arrive to a moment where everyone is there achieving the same, let's say, outcome. The other question is how many opportunities or many solutions we need to look at. Okay, and that also depends on each country, each company, and so on. For some companies, probably it's interesting to jump directly from a whole technology to the most revolutionary technology. I don't know, I'm not defending anyone. For other companies, this shift must be more progressive, okay? We need to look at, we identify opportunities to look at, okay? That's the major points. Finally, how do we will report that? Based on wishful thinking? No. Based on strict indicators. Let me give you an example of an indicator. Total CO2 emissions compared with the added value of a company. Okay? So if you can progress in that indicator, we are demonstrating that we are aligned with the goal. That's one of the indicators we can speak about, and it is identified on the document. We have a number of other indicators. So the major question of the document is not only saying that you are adding value or collaborating with this SDG goal or that SDG target. The question is, how are we performing on that? And performing is based on indicators, and those indicators are defined by the United Nations, because SDGs have 3 layers. 1, the goal layer, 2, the target layer, and 3rd, the indicator layer. What we have done at EDP was taking those indicators and taking the goals and transforming those indicators as management indicators, linked to our public goals and linked to remuneration of the board and everyone. For instance, we have an indicator for accidents and fatalities. This indicator is very much related with SDGs. It's present all over. But the major point is it applies to me as well, to the board, as well to any worker at EDPs. So internalizing those major indicators in our daily lives implies that when taking decisions, analyzing a new project, we need to check the indicators because you are going to perform on that. If our target is very demanding or slower than that, it depends on the company. What do we think? And I think Mikel will help me on this. What do you think about the evaluation of our performance? We think that we'll need to expose ourselves to external frameworks and be analyzed by others, okay? Be analyzed by other stakeholders, shareholders, workers, through a framework of questions, mature, international, etc., will give us the best photo we wish. So don't think, for us, we try to don't think in our proud, if we are nice with ourselves. The point is how the world is seeing us, how our stakeholders are seeing us. Stakeholders are local communities, our clients, our workers, are our partners in the supply chain, our investors, of course, okay, but also the global world. And the major idea is about a concept that Porter and Kramer put in place years ago, and that is very much about sustainability, to create added value, but in a perspective of shared value, adding value for every stakeholder. So also for climate, also for people. So my question is internalizing indicators in our daily lives. That moves a company from early stage to, the sustainability roadmap and the pathway.
Thank you, Eduardo. And I think I'm going to pick your cue and ask Mikel what his experience and his views are on this, because his organization was equally a part of developing this roadmap.
Thank you very much. Eduardo, I have to say that I do agree with your views in many points. We are sharing fully the view that performance is measured through KPIs, and therefore we need to make sure that the whole company, including the board, is aligned. And this is what we do ourselves as well. Our trip started many years ago, and we became carbon neutral 5 years ago, at which point we realized that it was not enough. We needed to do more, and we needed to do it faster. And this is why we set ourselves into a new 5-year plan, by which we are committing ourselves to move the needle, to regenerate, to restore our impact into our society. That's very nice to say, but we need to be a bit more specific and to make sure that everybody which is working around Acciona Energy is aligned. So we did exactly the same. We set these KPIs with goals, and we make sure that they are shared by everybody, from the top, from the board, through the management, all the way to all our workforce. Okay, and it's of course linked to remuneration. What does it mean? Well, we have specific yearly targets with a 5-year goal. In terms of, for example, emissions, we are set ourselves to go beyond neutrality and reduce 60% further our emissions in that 5-year plan. Or, for example, we want to go beyond our 94% recycling of all our waste, with the specific actions and being followed up at the different levels of the organization. This has to be, like Eduardo said, monitored not only by ourselves, but also by the outside world. Okay, and this is why we use the standard rating agencies that is giving us always a benchmark to see how good we are and how good are the others, so we can try to make sure that we go as fast as we can. I'm talking about different organizations, Dow Jones, Standard & Poor's, and the likes. Okay, but that also happens at a local level because a lot of sustainability happens at the site. Okay, we need to report, we need to expose ourselves to the outside world, but we also need to have this social dialogue. What we call the social license. It's not a piece of paper that we get in a permitting process, but it's a continuous dialogue that goes on throughout the life of the plant or the asset that we are operating. And this is something very important for us. Okay, it's not something that perhaps you can report as such in a KPI, but if you're not doing it right, it comes out very quickly. You very quickly in today's world, you get media, all the networks that is telling you whether you're doing right or wrong. And in some cases, we put our commitments in writing, okay, and we raise it to public just to make sure that the community is happy and also understands our coherence. So to summarize, faster and regeneration goes through KPIs, which are actually linked to our remuneration, and also are subject to public scrutiny, both at a global level with the rating agencies and also at a local level through our relationship with the local communities. Thank you.
Right. So what I'm hearing both of you say is that it is very, very important to have clear indicators and commit ourselves to those indicators and track them. The concept of social license, Mikel, is something which I think adds a lot of credibility to what organizations do and how it impacts communities around them. Of course, all of this has a cost, right? I mean, a commitment to SDGs, a commitment to sustainability comes with huge financial implications. And I'm going to, direct this to Vinay. He's the CFO of JSW Energy. What, according to you, are the strategies, the solutions, the ways and approaches which the sector in India is adopting to reach these goals? Because it's the developing economy perspective is always a little different from the more evolved companies and the more evolved markets. So, what would your views on this be, Vinay?
No, Jyoti, you're right. I mean, it's very important. I mean, on the one hand, the urgency can't be overstressed, as my colleagues have already talked about. But there is also the reality at ground in terms of, how do you balance, stakes, so to say. So just to put things into perspective, I mean, for especially for developing countries like India, I think you can't just switch off one day. It's going to be a transition path. So there's a three-pronged approach that, the country as a whole and all the companies in the industry are also approaching. First is, wherever possible, replacing fossil fuels with renewables. And what is helping there, of course, is this, that with innovation and scale, we've seen it's really now economics 101. I mean, to give you an example, the cost of photovoltaic panels for solar modules, have come down by 90% in the last 10 years. The same for onshore wind turbines have come down by 60% in the last decade. So today, purely on economics 101, there is a justification of, from a risk return perspective, that you will have capital available to deploy for those kind of solutions. And no wonder, we've already seen as a country, cross the milestone of 100 gigawatt of installed capacity, excluding hydro, from a green point of view. And that is a very, very critical milestone in our now, the new goal of hitting 500 gigawatt by 2030. So generation is available. The second is, of course, that, what do you do with the legacy infrastructure, where you need to make investments to reduce the CO2 emissions. And that requires a huge amount of investment from retrofitting, etc. point of view. And no wonder if you look at, for example, the India's environmental norms for the thermal power sector, it started for the first time sometime in December 2024, because while the private sector will be able to find solutions, but the bulk of the problem is with the large number of state-owned generating stations. Where does the funding come for retrofitting that? And today almost 40 gigawatt of total installed thermal capacity in India is more than 25 years old. So that is something where we need to kind of collectively need to find a solution. And the third is, of course, removing unavoidable carbon emissions through carbon capture, usage, storage, etc. So these are the three prongs, and I think that as you specifically asked, from a strategy solutions point of view, depending on where people are in the value chain, everybody is kind of trying to adapt to one of these paradigms.
Right, and I think it's good segue for me to go to Dr. Das, because you mentioned that innovation and scaling, the ability to scale up new technology to ensure that we are able to deploy and adopt the new practices which we all know that we need to in this literally race to save ourselves and our future for the planet. Dr. Das, you are working really at the cusp of technology, innovation, scaling up. You've been involved in a lot of incubation and working with the startup space. So where do you think that all of this is going to help us in our quest to achieve the sustainable development goals that we all know that we do need to adopt and achieve?
Thank you, Jyoti. I think it's been a great perspective coming from all the three speakers. And what I would like to say that when you are looking at innovation per se, we should not really complicate innovation, in the sense that it has to be very dynamic. We should not, the real trick to encourage innovation is when you are coming out with a new idea, it continues to have some sort of a medium term, short term, and a long term roadmap, and then it should continue on its own. So it should be kind of sustainable, looking at, and the advantage of innovation is it is always current, in the sense that it always addresses the current problem. If sustainability is one of the requirement for the innovation today, you will find predominantly technology coming in would have an element of sustainability, or that addressing the issue of climate action also built in around that. And then the collaboration part which we talked about is important, and the collaboration here is, we're talking about academic institutions who have got a lot of products and solutions, innovation at the edge of the lab. They struggle there. They are in the lab, they somewhere reach the edge of the lab, and they're not able to cross that forbidden zone at the death valley, as we say, to go and deploy the product. And that is where the partnership with the industry would come in, and the industry would help those technologies at the academic level to really cross that important barrier, handle them, and tell them that it is not so challenging as you think it is. It is possible, there is a market, and you have to just go and explore that market. And that is where that partnership, and which startup are does so well in doing that. So that academia, the taking the advantage of the faculty, researchers, students, the bright students to do it, that's an important area. But what we are seeing now as an emerging trend and a very successful emerging trend is the way the startups have come out. Startups really helps us to address the challenge of scale. How I would say that is, if you are looking at any product, you mentioned about the solar cost been coming down by 90%, and it was a path. It has taken some time to move around and then have the scale helping us to reduce the price. Now, today, when you are looking at these startups, they really start from a scale at a cost which is really affordable, and then not necessarily targets the mass market. It moves in a niche. It maybe at sometimes go to a mass, and then you have this e-commerce platform and all working as support systems to take it to the next level. The startups helps us to address the challenge of risk, because you are starting small, you are not having a very large organizations to work around. And then also it helps to define new process. And wherever there is a substitution is required, for instance, if you are looking at a new technology which requires substitution, you will find a startup coming in and offering that substitution. At Clean Energy International Incubation Center, which is a joint initiative of Tata Trust and Government of India, Tata Power, it's housed in the Tata Power DDL building. Tata Power is also supporting it for all the startups. We have got about 35 startups, and incidentally, one of the startups, Takachar, has also won the Moonshot Prize, which has been announced very recently. And being one of the incubators, we have seen. I've really worked with this startup and seen that the approach towards the problem. And then it was not starting with the same problem it was addressing. It was looking at a thought and how that technology is going to have a large array of solutions which could address various segments. And what we do there also is, when we are taking the startups for incubation, we also with Rise Sweden, we have developed a framework. We look to capture that how much of the carbon this technology potentially reduce. And we have found that our startups till the second cohort was able to reduce 250 MT of carbon. And then it is a continuous process. We keep on mapping it. So how do you really nurture these startups and how do you really help them to kind of de-risk and then get them into the ecosystem very quickly? For instance, a large company may have a challenge to kind of come out with a product development, then it has also this challenge to cannibalize some of the product line which is already established in the marketplace. So how do you really address that? The startup ecosystem can come in. You can develop the product solution partnering with the startups, or maybe nurture or adopt a startup and then see that it fits into your larger scheme of things when it comes to strategy. Support the startup to scale up the product solution, provide them with the support system which is required to make really a successful company, and you can move towards that. And as I don't mind repeating that the right from the day one, the startups are having that focus on sustainability, and because the innovation is largely current. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Das. Mikhail, I would like to ask you, considering that from the India perspective, from what Dr. Das is saying, we have found this whole startup ecosystem and incubating new technology to be one of the interesting ways for us to accelerate our movement on the path to faster sustainable solutions. Your company does a lot of work in the innovation and collaboration space. What would you think are the best ways for us to leverage that to move forward?
Thank you. I fully agree with Dr. Das's view by which you need to take all the opportunities available in today's innovation world. We define it as innovation to sustainability, by which we set up an innovation ecosystem, which is formed by, of course, academia, universities with which we collaborate, but we also have added all these startups. We do open innovation, which means that we can tap to all these startups in the areas where our own sustainability plan tells us that we need innovation. In such a way, we try to breach over that no man's land that Dr. Das was mentioning, by which we bring the business startup ecosystem to work with the startup that was giving us some insights into the use of blockchain to trace in a digital way the origin of our renewable energy. How do you know when you're plugging your computer that the electrons that are coming to your computer are actually green or not green, you know? Well, with the work of this startup and the help of others, we managed to set up what we call Green Chain, which is our blockchain technology to trace back the origin of our renewable energy from the plant to the consumer. Okay, and we kept on working with the same startup, and we have developed it not just to trace the clean energy of the energy, but also to trace all the ESG attributes that energy has. So, for example, when a client in a part of the world is consuming our electricity, he also sees through this platform all the social programs or the emissions that we are cutting thanks to the electrons they are consuming. And now we are moving a step further. We are very active in the green hydrogen. We are just now commissioning our first green hydrogen project in the south of Europe. And we're facing the same issues. How do you trace back the origin of that hydrogen when eventually it's going to get mixed with gas in some applications? Well, blockchain again is going to help us to trace it back and to make sure that whoever is consuming that green hydrogen knows where's it coming from, what are the social attributes linked to that grams or kilograms or tons of green hydrogen, and how many emissions we are cutting thanks to the use of that. Fundamental to all this is the ecosystem, to work closely with the startups, to work closely with academia, to make sure they understand the needs of the business and to make sure that the business makes use of those new technologies. Thank you.
That's very, very interesting, Mikel. What I would like to do now is to maybe shift gear a little bit to what has happened at the COP26 very recently, and open it up to all of you one by one in terms of what you see are the opportunities, what are the challenges, and I would like Vinay for you to address it specifically in the context of climate finance and the new announcements on reporting standards, and then I will move on to our other panelists.
Thank you, Jyoti. Yeah, I mean, in a way, climate finance is going to be very, very key. We saw at COP26, India through Prime Minister Modi's deliberation reiterating, that the developed world's commitment to mobilize $100 billion annually as climate finance support to developing countries to meet the existing obligations towards carbon emissions is going to be very key. I think he talked about $1 trillion that is going to be needed for this decade. But from a climate finance point of view, there is already a financing available, but it is available in for certain subsectors. So let me give you a perspective. India saw a debut green dollar bond issuance, in terms of, trying to diversify access to a different pool of liquidity, an international pool of liquidity, for the first time in 2014, by one of the renewable energy generation developers. Now, let me share some statistic, with my fellow panelists and the audience here. Between 2014 to calendar year 2020, the total amount that was raised through multiple issuances, I think almost 17, 18 issuances, was just short of $7 billion through a combination of either green bonds or sustainability-linked bonds. In calendar year 2021 alone, in the first 10 months, counting November, as a country, we have raised another $6.8 billion. So what we cumulatively we were able to raise in the first 6 years is what we have been able to raise in this year alone. So this is a very small example. So totally as a country, we have already raised $13.5 billion. We, as a company, we did our debut green dollar bond issuance earlier this year in the month of May. It was over $700 million issuance for our green projects on the hydro side. It was the first ever green bond issuance by any hydro developer. And the response to that was amazing. We got almost 4 times oversubscription. So the limited point I'm making is this, that, there is an appetite, from an ESG funds, etc. point of view to allocate capital to green projects. But at the same time, it is not a complete picture. the numbers that are being talked about for us to get to 500 gigawatt, the incremental 350 gigawatt, that is a country that we need to build, requires anywhere between $2.5-3 trillion of investment on generation alone. So you have where are the pools of capital available? One is the domestic lending system, which has constraints of capital availability, and more importantly, these are infrastructure projects with longer asset life. So what is happening is this, that for long construction projects, 20-25 year project life, the liquidity that is available is only domestically, because international capital does not want to bear the construction risk related to project execution. So once the projects are executed, they are commissioned, they are seasoned, then you can recycle the capital by tapping into the international bond markets. Now, domestically, of course, while the government has talked about, a dedicated project financing institution to fund the national infrastructure pipeline, but we do need capital for that. So recycling of capital is less of a problem, but getting fresh capital for under construction projects through international market is still a challenge. So therefore, I think it's a part of the learning curve, so to say. That as it's like a chicken and egg thing, right? As people get more comfort with the risks and the appropriate mitigation measures put there, capital can be made available. But I think in that context, making sure that a large chunk of climate financing funding, and that has to largely come from either developed countries or through various multilateral financial institutions, where there could be certain projects which will be very necessary from an environment point of view, but maybe difficult to justify from a credit risk mitigation point of view. So how do you deal with those? Mikhail was interestingly talking about the hydrogen project that he's doing. We also, as a company, a few months ago signed a framework collaboration agreement for a green hydrogen in industrial applications. So to go from a scoping study to a pilot project to actually a commercialization, and then looking for financing for that is going to be a steep challenge, because the traditional ways of assessing or project appraisal of a project financing may not be applicable, because you may not have a 25-year offtake arrangement with a fixed price or a visibility of pricing. So how do you mitigate those risks? I think those are the spaces from a climate financing point of view that we need to kind of figure out as we go ahead.
Right. I think there are some challenges there, and definitely a lot of work happening to try and get around those. Eduardo, I would love to have your views on this, considering you come from a country which is, I think, right up there on this roadmap and has, I think, found a way around a lot of these issues and concerns. So over to you.
Thank you. Let me just give a word on the innovation discussion. Just to say, I'm agree very much what was said. That's that. But to add this concept, for the new energy technology, renewable technology, we are very much looking at CapEx costs and less on OpEx costs. Okay, this makes a huge difference when analyzing an investment and everything that is connected with the project. But we need to understand that we are not buying coal or gas to give the energy. We are just doing maintenance operations of a huge capital investment. This is very important when we think about the technology. Secondly, we need to understand that we moved from the focus on huge power plants, okay, to many diversified and distributed power plants, okay. This transfers the focus of the business on networks. The center of our business now is networks with a lot of appliances connected, okay? So we need to have a very, very, very and dynamic and innovative network that covers all the countries, Okay, those two points connected to innovation, that implies that we have now much more opportunities of introducing solutions, different solutions at small scale all over. So we are not anymore concentrated on huge power plants. Everybody can test things on the power grid, and the real solutions deploying from the idea to real life is very fast now. And there it comes the opportunity to scale up with startups and ideas from every part of the world, coming from the States to China, from China to the States. Okay, you are bubbling in terms of innovation. That point. Secondly, taking your question, and I'm sorry for this aspect. What we see, reporting under a framework, it's useful for everyone. Mandatory reporting with details that fits the principles of responsible investment and informing mainly the financial sector. The financial sector needs to have detailed and comparable information, because the way the financial sector can tackle climate change is fundamentally by differentiating the credit and the debt policies. Okay, if a major bank wish to state that we are contributing to decarbonization, well, they need to demonstrate that they give money to the real investors on the energy. So this is very, very interesting, because that mind shift really happened a couple of years ago, okay, when the global politicians and the sustainability sector understood that financing is the road, that is the highway, let's say, is the highway to sustainability. Okay, joining investors, joining financials, well, creating the ecosystem for sustainability or renewable energy. Okay, very important. Let's take that opportunity, and as we had done at EDP, we define a target for changing our debt to green debt. Okay, we will have a bit full green in a couple of years. Okay, and that problem of getting the national or the international financing for our project, that I understand very much the topic or the difficulty, I think we need to introduce another aspect on the discussion to add to it. One, this aspect is more or less based on this idea. We have thousands of companies working on this area, the renewable energy area. They are all over the world. They are big companies, small companies, and the logic of the movement of the flow of the capital is moving always from low profit to high profit. It's changing depth. Well, okay, this is a very dynamic. We have a lot of money circulating in the world now, a lot of money. So if we want to take a stake on that at the international level, we need to join in joint ventures, mainly for huge risky operations like offshore, deep offshore wind. Okay, as much as the risk grows, we need to join with other companies to leverage our capacity and to face the innovation process that is related to the level of risk. So for me, this is very, very important. Doing joint ventures, opening our projects to others, and raising capital, enough capital to accelerate.
Yeah, thank you very much, Eduardo. I think there is some very interesting concepts and learnings for all of us there. I will just pick up the collaboration point which you raised and address my question to Dr. Das, who does a lot of work in the collaboration space. My question to you, Dr. Das, would be, how would you link what has been discussed, announced, debated at COP26 to the entire collaboration agenda? And I'm conscious of time, so I will address this question to you for a quick answer and then move on to Mikkel. And I think after that, we may have a little time for questions from our audience.
I feel that, if you look at India, largely you're talking about net zero, end of the day. And then if you look at India, we stand in a very important crossroads. We have got a set of people who are very aspiring. The quality of life needs to be improved, the poverty improvement, more improvement to be done on the poverty level, and energy is going to play a very big role. And per capita consumption of energy in India, electricity in India, is actually below the world average and very much lagging behind many of the developed countries. Having said that, it doesn't mean that you need to spend more energy to be more efficient or more developed. We have to find a media to really figure out that how best we work around the system. And that is where exactly the opportunities lie. When we are talking about renewable, now imagine a situation when we are talking about a plant load factor of something like 16 to 20% in the case of solar, we are able to innovate and come out with something which exceeds 60%. How that is going to transform the entire game. The kind of wind we can harness, I'm talking about specifically the renewable space. If you are able to harness the offshore wind which is there, if you are able to find ways and means, the natural calamities which hit India and other parts of the world, if you are able to some way kind of play ball with that and then try to use that as a leverage for various things, can we work around innovation in that space? I think that is going to be important. So having said that, innovation continues to be an important area. We have to continue to work on new technologies, new processes, new way of working things. If we are going to use coal, is it some way that we can reduce the carbon emission? Is it some way that we can capture the carbon or use it for different symbiotic application if we are able to figure out around that? And then how do we really play a role? And then we continue to grow, develop. At the same time, we are conscious of the fact that we are not reducing or kind of discharging too much carbon. And I feel that there exist opportunities for companies like Tata Power and many of these companies, maybe Jindal and the startup ecosystem, all to come together to really ride this opportunity and really contribute to the development. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Das. And I think we have an interesting juxtaposition, which I would like Mikkel to bring out, where you mentioned that, you have already achieved carbon neutrality, but once you reach there, you realize that even that is not enough. And there is so much more still to be done. So while countries like India are still working out plans to reach net zero, here we have your organization, which has done that and is still working on a lot more and has realized that, that's just not enough. So what is it that you would like to leave our audiences with as, some thoughts or some closing remarks from your side?
Thank you, Yoti. I will link with our previous remark. Pritesh, my colleague panelist, was saying there's a lot of money out there, financing money, looking for financing renewable energy in our case. But the money is afraid of the construction risk. Pritesh was explained very clearly. So we have the need and we have the money. What is the missing piece of the puzzle? Well, the expertise and the companies that are willing to fill in the gap. We have been developing that for 30 years. And joining and linking with a comment from Eduardo and Dr. Das about joint ventures, we realized that to go beyond, in some cases, we need to join forces. So We have the expertise, we can take the risk, we have been doing it now for decades, we know how to do it, we have the trust of the financing entities to do it, and we know that for these new ventures like offshore or hydrogen, we probably also need to join forces with other companies. In our case, we identified an American company that was willing to join forces to deliver green hydrogen equipment. Or in the case of offshore wind, where we have not been active until now, we have joined forces with the Scottish renewal partner, SSE, to make sure that we join the knowledge and we provide the trust that a financial community needs to put the money in the first place. Once it's up and running, I agree, it's easy to find the money, but it's bearing that risk where we need to put our expertise on the table and fetch the opportunity, which, by the way, is going to become bigger and more common all over the world. So I do suggest that everybody attending this call may look for those opportunities with the expertise that they can develop, either at their own companies or together with other partners.
Thank you, Mikel. And I think we are just almost done with the time we had for the panel. It's been a very, very interesting and stimulating conversation. I think I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I hope you all have, and so have our audiences. Just 2 or 3 key points which I think I've picked up, and I would just sort of like to leave them with our audience. One is that it is very important to have performance metrics very clearly defined, and then really put our commitment on the table, both from an organizational vision, mission, principle perspective, but also from a remuneration and financial perspective, because that is what then really helps us to follow through with them. The second big point that I've picked up is that collaboration, whether it is academia and industry, whether it is within the sector, one company collaborating with another, whether it is supporting the startup ecosystem, but that is really going to be key to unlock the true potential that we all individually have, but need to now really collectively unveil for the world to ensure that we reach where we need to reach as the human race. And the third thing that I picked up is that, of course, there is a cost to all of this, but that cost is probably much, much lesser than the cost of not doing anything. And our panelists have also, all agreed that there is enough money to do this. We just have to make sure that we are collectively putting out the right work, the right messages, and the right opportunities, and coming together to ensure that we are able to do this. So thank you very much. We do have time for, I think, maybe one question. I'll just read it out. The panel has talked a lot about the importance of metrics, and that is obviously linked then to reporting. And if any of you may please pick this up, what are your views on the TCFD principles, which are becoming the standard in a number of developed countries and are still sort of catching up and being experimented with in terms of understanding and in the emerging markets? So how do you think that, these can be used by the sector to get financing for technologies which are the most forward-looking?
You are directing the question to anyone?
You can pick it up, Eduardo, and maybe we can have one more panelist add to it, and then that's.
I don't know if TCFD will live forever. Will live forever. I'm not sure. What I'm sure is that everyone now understands perfectly that we need to have a financial framework connected with climate and many other things. Okay? We need to have a common framework, and people are working on that. For instance, look at what GRI and SASB had done. They joined forces to debate. What has been said on all major organizations? Well, let's look for standards. Okay, so let's move on that pathway. Take TCFD as the best approach now. Okay, complement it with CDP, Sustainalytics, Dow Jones, Ethisphere, whatever. Okay, and try to progress on that idea. Notice that very soon the European Union will publish a major framework on company reporting. So everything is moving on. If you look at the SDGs indicators, probably we'll find 90% of the really important indicators there. So we have the work done. Just is like Glasgow. Well, you published a document with 97 points, probably 27 approaches to climate financing. Everything is the same, it seems. Okay, so you are trying to make a community of thoughts on strategy. It is very hard for our world because our world is confronted with major and complexities and problems, not only climate change. It's a complex world. Let's strive on it.
Thank you, Eduardo. Vinay, any remarks from you from a finance and India perspective?
Yeah. No, I agree with Eduardo. I mean, it was the Equator Principles many years ago, when TCFD was not heard of, So I think today the issue, and I would just like to clarify, TCFD is about disclosures, and it's all about disclosures. So you have the ISSB that was being talked about earlier, which is an attempt to consolidate, some of the disclosure standards. I believe somebody from TCFD is also going to be part of the technical committee there, so which is good, which is welcome, so that if we have one harmonized disclosure thing. But the issue is this, that I don't think that, and especially from a developing country like India's point of view, Eduardo and Mikel's experiences could be slightly different, probably, so I will take the liberty of saying that. But from a developing country's perspective point of view, I don't think it is about the lack of disclosure. So let me give you an example. Today you have external commercial borrowings which are available in India, for any project financing, forget green, anything else otherwise. What is a typical tenor for which that financing is available? Or what is the appetite of the banks to lend for what kind of a tenor? It is anywhere between 7 years to maximum of 8, 9, up to 10 years, not longer than that. Now, when we are looking at sizing of debt for a project which has an asset life of 25, 30 years, a rupee or a INR denominated project financing, you can easily get for 20-year door-to-door financing. But a 7-year door-to-door ECB doesn't help you solve for that. And I'm sure it is not 7-year because of lack of disclosure. So just because somebody migrates to TCFD, I'm sorry for putting it across bluntly, no risk committee or a credit committee of a US dollar funder will be saying that, okay, now I'm happy to take a 20-year funding because it's an asset liability mismatch issue. So therefore, let's make an important distinction about how much of capital is not being available because of lack of appropriate disclosures and standards. That is one thing. But I think for bankable projects, credible developers, it is not a question of disclosures. It is a question of the pool of capital itself not being conducive for that kind of risk. The point that Mikel was rightly making out, that, how do you get the certain intermediaries in between? So, for example, you already have developmental financial institutions, for the ECA tie-up. So if you're importing equipment from XYZ country, the particular developmental financial institution of that country is willing to take, a funding, available for that. But again, there the tenor is 10 to 12 years. So the issue is a classic ALM asset liability mismatch issue. How do you solve for that? I don't think, TCFD is going to solve for that. But yeah, TCFD is welcome, or any other new standard that it can morph into and call it by any name, as Eduardo was trying to allay. Yeah.
Thank you, Pritesh, and thank you very much to all our panelists for this very interesting discussion. Over to you, Joe.
Thank you very much, Jyoti, and all the panel. That was a great discussion, and I also appreciate all the work that's gone on from the audience to ask questions and to get those answered both by the panel and also in the chat. A fantastic discussion. We are going to take a break. I've put in the chat, I put a link to a guide for electric utilities to the TCFD, notwithstanding the comments about the permanence of any framework, but I hope that you find that useful. So, but yeah, a really big thanks to everyone who took us through that discussion. And we're going to take a break, and we're going to come back at 4:45 India time, which is in I think just over 10 minutes. And then we're going to have our last discussion of the day, which is going to focus especially on collective action. So a brilliant discussion on the solutions and the strategies for utilities. Thank you very much. And please join us back here at 4:45 for a discussion on collective action. Thank you very much.
Recording stopped.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I hope you had a good break.
Recording in progress.
After that excellent session moderated by Jyoti Bansal. We are now going to have our last discussion for the day. And this is going to focus on opportunities for collective action. So I'm going to introduce my colleague, Florian Miko. He's the associate with the World Business Council in the People and Society program, and he played a key role in the development of many of our SDG sector roadmaps, and particularly this electric utilities sector roadmap. So Florian is going to moderate this discussion now. So it's a pleasure. Florian, over to you.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you very much for the introduction, and good afternoon to you all. My name is Florian Miko, as Joe said, and on behalf of the Wbcsd, we are grateful to have you all today for this special event organized jointly with Tata Power on accelerating business action in line with the SDGs with a focus on electric utilities. So as you already know, this event is being organized following the launch of the SDGs sector roadmap for electric utilities that my colleague James presented earlier this morning. We launched this back in March, and 6 months on, it's really a pleasure to see this taking shape and to discuss with all of you today. I had personally the pleasure, as Joe said, to work on behalf of the Wbcsd with 11 of the world leading electric utility companies to explore, articulate, and set a course to realizing the unique potential of this sector, as well as to leverage its influence and innovation to make a great leap towards realizing the ambitions and transformation needed to achieve the SDGs. So this roadmap, as highlighted by James earlier today, aims to serve as a transition tool for the sector, but success is dependent on collective action. So inclusive partnerships and collaboration with sector peers and other local and regional stakeholders, including in the value chain, civil society and academia, are needed to achieve greater SDG impact. So in that regard, in the next 60 minutes, we will focus on the kind of and importance of collective action needed to realize the SDGs and aim to address some of the challenges that we may face in accelerating SDG action, as well as the opportunities that can be harnessed along the way in India and other key emerging markets. We also want to discuss a bit about the enablers to help us meeting the 2030 deadline with, for instance, insights on policy and regulatory support, finance, partnerships, and collaboration, and as well as the concrete benefits that utilities can unlock from being aligned with the SDGs and integrate them in the strategy and operation. So for this panel discussion that I'm delighted to chair, we are lucky to have with us 4 outstanding speakers from forward-looking companies from the power sector in India and the Southeast Asia region, but as well as renowned experts from the financial institution and forward-looking organization with a global mindset as well, who will share with us insights and experience on this crucial topic. So first, I should introduce you to Diksha Vats. She's a sustainability officer for the Aditya Birla Group. Diksha is driving the sustainable business transformation agenda for ABJ across all its locations on strategic, operation, communication, and advocacy aspects of sustainability. Global conglomerate, ABJ is also active in 14 industry sectors. We also have the luck to have Vicky Sins with her. So Vicky is the lead climate an energy benchmark for the World Benchmarking Alliance. So in our role, Vicky is responsible for these benchmarks to support the decarbonization of the economy and the energy transition in a system-based approach. She also believes that the private sector can make a strong contribution and has a responsibility to take action by demonstrating how companies are contributing to the Paris Agreement and to the SDG 13 as well. We also have the chance to have Hendrik Rosenthal with us. Hendrik is the Director of Group Sustainability for CLP Group. He is responsible for the sustainability-related strategy, reporting and communication to support CLP in running as a leading responsible energy provider in the Asia-Pacific region. CLP Group is actually one of the largest investor-owned power businesses in Asia-Pacific, with investments in Hong Kong, mainland China, India, Southeast Asia, Taiwan, and Australia. And fourth, we also had the chance to have with us Dr. Ishan Purohit, energy specialist at the International Finance Corporation of the World Bank. Ishan is focusing on the Southeast Asia region, and he has also a broad experience in the development of renewable energy projects of diverse scales and technologies. He is working on utility scale, captive and off-grid power in India and Southeast Asia, and is now focused as well on advisory services in the power sector. Presently, he is also technically supervising several investments and upstream deals of IFC in utility scale solar power system in the region as well. So I should just highlight that we will have a few minutes at the end of the session for an interactive Q&A. So please, if you have any questions for our panelists, do not hesitate to type them in the chat and we'll make our best to address them. So with that, let's start our discussion by addressing the ways in which power utilities can work with other peers from different regions, each facing unique challenges, as we will see in a few minutes, and other key stakeholders to maximize SDG impact. So first, may I turn to you, Hendrik. So the SDG Roadmap for utilities is an example of collaboration at the global level and emphasizes as well on the importance of collective action between industry peers and with key stakeholders. So should I ask you, has CLP's roadmap engagement changed or influenced the way in which the group thinks about and works with the SDGs? And how has it influenced your ambition and approach to collaborative action?
Great. Yeah, no, very good question. Thanks very much for having us join the discussion this evening. I'm calling in from Hong Kong here. So just to provide a little bit of background, CLP is an electric utility that, as you mentioned, has a broad portfolio across Asia Pacific, but we also have and continue to have a very diverse mix of generation assets. And we have indeed a Climate Vision 2050 that helps us to decarbonize these assets. That is really providing us a pathway to change and to be much more aligned with these SDGs, as you quite rightly ask, in terms of how does that really manifest for us as an organization here. And we had quite a lot of discussions as we went through this roadmap development, the roadmap for electric utilities with the other colleagues, and some of them were on the line just prior to this session. And it really was quite clear that we are all facing very similar challenges. And the climate change agenda, with COP26 being front of mind for everyone, certainly is a key piece of the puzzle that we need to really address as a sector and as a key service provider across all the economies where we operate. So what does that mean, though, in terms of collaboration? I think what's really important to remember here is that as a service provider, as a provider of an essential service for anyone within our communities, as we rely on the product, as we all rely on this product that we bring to the market, I think it's really important that we are fundamentally a type of business that is built upon collaboration. So in terms of really bringing the right pieces forward here, what does that mean? It is really about having consensus on regulatory changes. It is about having consensus, if you want to be more specific, on some of the SDGs, such as climate action, about the phase out of coal, for instance. And do we call it, we call it a phase out of coal. We don't call it a phase down, right? And we have a very clear target as an organization, and as many others that have worked on this particular piece of what that means for our sector and what sort of responsibility we carry to bring this forward. But we can't do this on our own. We rely on collaboration, not just within the sector, with our peers, but across the regulatory framework, across the communities where we operate, across governments. And that's really quite unique, perhaps to some extent, for our sector, is that we are very much heavily regulated, and there's a lot of eyes on us as a sector to deliver. It's just like water. We need electricity. That's how it works nowadays. So we definitely need to collaborate with the regulators, but we need to collaborate in such a way that we can actually make these SDGs happen by 2030. So there is some lack of coherence, perhaps more in that space, not within our sector, but across governments. And looking at what happened at COP and the commitments we have, I think we need to do a lot more work on this. Maybe I'll just stop there as a starting point.
Thank you very much, Henrik. It's actually a very good point, pointing out as well the results of COP and the needs for the agency as well for increasing action. From this, perhaps I could then turn to Ishan and have also his insight on the Indian market. The Indian renewable energy sector is currently undergoing a rapid growth. Could you tell us what are some of the challenges that the power sector may face in accelerating the energy transition in India? And how do you see the role of collaborative action in overcoming them, such as the one that, for instance, Henrik was referring to? And how is IFC supporting utilities in this journey as well?
Yeah, thank you very much. I hope I am audible to all. Yeah, so first of all, thanks for the opportunity. Now, starting with your first question, what type of challenges developers can face? From SDG point of view, I am of the personal opinion that it's very, very progressive and it is very positive, because especially in context of India, the new targets, especially of 500 gigawatt, those are really appreciating. So developers point of view, what I say from investment point of view or project point of view, there might be the practical challenges from execution point of view. For example, nowadays a lot of emphasis is being given on the energy storage technology. Or parallel, if you see the size of the project, we have seen journey of solar in past 10 years, where project has started from 5 megawatt capacity. Now people are talking minimum size of 300, 500 megawatt capacity. So if we are looking for financing, is easy nowadays. Any private bank or international bank, government bank, all are ready to finance, because it is in line with the targets, clean energy, easy to execute, and number of features which are positive there. But the biggest challenge is coming on ESIA point of view. Since there are a lot of liberty has been given to project developers by government, that they don't need clearances, they don't need a specific or detailed ESIA. But if you see from international perspective or IFC perspective, in our all type of investment projects, a detailed ESIA as per IFC performance standards is the mandatory. And this is the dimension where we becomes totally different from other banks, because most of our projects are stuck on this ESIA. For example, if you see the projects in the Western Rajasthan, which are of minimum 300 to 500 megawatt capacity, and the GIB, Great Indian Bustard issue, is there. And because of those 150, 200 number of birds, we are unable to disperse. Even developers are there, parties are there. So from challenge point of view, because we need to see each and every aspect. So though we have not directly following SDG specifically for the investment, but if our internal procedure is totally aligned with whatever the associated targets are there, for example, clean energy, for example, gender, for example, energy access, everything's there. So the example which I have given you, especially from GIB context point of view, you will surprise that around 1.5 gigawatt capacity pipeline of IFC projects are in hold. And we are simply waiting that what kind of measures actually could be taken from execution point of view. And you know that Supreme Court, everybody, and multiple NGOs, all players are involved in that whatever the technical measures are being suggested, whether those are techno-commercially viable or not, and it is making. So this is just one example. Land acquisition might be a challenge, or supply of the technology might be a challenge. So Tata Power is also there, and we are working with Tata Power on various aspects of grid-connected storage. So just giving one more example that if we are targeting about a new technology and Government of India is coming with a 1 gigawatt plan, so even they do auction today, do we have players in local or even international market who can supply the technology within the time of 1 year? So those kind of the challenges which are upfront, what anybody can see those challenges. The size of the project and availability of the options. And every time there are the changes in the regulation. For example, new import duties are proposed, new policies are proposed which may not be in favor of international import or local production. So sometimes I feel that especially in the solar side, policies are contradicting each other. So that is again a challenge. This is at this point of time, it is at lower side, but in longer run, we can see that because if you see most of the PPAs and developers are claiming that they are not getting signed because back-to-back PSAs are not signed. Because auction rates are too fast, and within a month you are getting off-taker are getting 2 or 3 options or choices of the tariff. So why he will go with the higher one? So every DISCOM is waiting for the lowest tariff, new bidding, and they are negotiating accordingly. And then developers are finding difficulty for bankability of the project. And last but not least, your question is, we have how we are actually ensuring that one, the compliance of SDG. So just on a specific note that if you see, IFC is basically not without being in any race, not a big bank. We have our limited portfolio of 8 billions, around 11 gigawatt or 12 gigawatt energy, but it is clean energy. So as per as World Bank's decision that we cannot invest in any thermal or conventional, means which is making pollution, those kind of energy. So our maximum portfolio belongs to either gas, otherwise mainly it is renewable energy, and around 55% of our investment belongs to solar side. So those practices are well established in our system. Later I will explain that how we ensure that the compliance of SDGs or indicators are well met through our investment or any kind of advisory or upstream project. Yeah, this is. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ishan. Thank you for these insights. And I guess the recurring theme is also the policy coherence and the fact that basically for a company and for the private sector, the policymakers are obviously a key stakeholders to engage with to help them as well to unlock their potential. So perhaps now we could address another key topic for us, which is the importance of measuring performance in a standardized way and benchmark to back actually the company's efforts to meet the 2030 deadline. So for this, I will turn to Diksha. Aditya Birla has developed ambitious objective to boost the use of clean energy in its own operation in India. So with sustainability at the core of your strategic thinking, can you tell us a bit more about what support you seek to provide to and take from power utilities when embarking upon this journey? And how are you as a company tracking progress to ensure that you are on track in line with the SDGs? Diksha. We're going to hear you're on mute.
I realized that. Sorry about that. Yeah. So I think, thank you for having me here. And as we speak, we're parallelly having this discussion on how, as Aditya Birla Group, which I represent here, we have presence in very diverse sectors. At one end, we are into heavy manufacturing like aluminium and cement, chemicals, making viscose staple fiber. To the other end, we are into fashion and retail, telecom. So given that diversity, one of the things we look at or talk about in terms of decarbonization or overall ESG strategy is very contextualized. From utilities perspective, as Aditya Birla Group, for the heavy manufacturing, we have captive power generation. So there isn't much of the power that is being purchased from utilities in those. But then in our chemicals, in our fashion and retail or telecom businesses, we are, or for that matter, in our grinding units of cement, we are getting power from utilities. And I think 2-3 key things, some of them are directly with utilities and some is with utilities. First one being the mix of the generation itself, given the ambition that most of our Aditya Birla Group businesses as a group with net zero by 2050, and Hindalco is declared, which is our aluminium business, its ambition to be net zero by 2050. As cement, we've taken science-based targets, but are also talking about net zero concrete by 2015, aligned to the Global Cement and Concrete Association. And in cement, for example, in the grinding units, cement sector, 85 to almost 87% of the energy that we use is thermal in nature, and only the remaining 15% is electrical. And in that, we've declared our ambition to, we are signatories to RE100 and, various other things to say, we want to move to 100% renewable energy in times to come. And therefore, the generation mix, which is directly from utilities, and then with utilities is all about, especially in a country like India, the changes in the grid infrastructure. Because many locations, the big challenge is how do you get those quantum of power, whether it's aluminium or cement, the locations of an alumina refinery or a cement calcination unit, the integrated plant, is close to where the raw material is available. So, you set up a cement plant where limestone is, you set up an alumina refinery closer to where the bauxite is available, and therefore those places may not be necessarily where the renewable energy sources are available. And therefore, the whole thing of grid infrastructures is another thing. And third, which is linked to renewable energy, and if I was to use the example of Hindalco, is about the power which is being used. So aluminium making is the heart of the process. Smelting is an electrolysis process, and therefore is electrified in that sense. And therefore, the decarbonization depends on the nature of the fuel that you use. So the reliability of the decarbonized electricity, for want of any other word, is very important. And therefore, grid infrastructure and storage, that 24/7 clean power is absolutely essential if one has to move an aluminium smelter to a greener fuel source or power source. So I think I would leave it at that. Those are the two things. And did you have a part 2 to the question, Florian?
No.
Is there anything?
Exactly, Diksha. But perhaps the second part were more focused on how do you actually are tracking progress on the SDGs internally. So you mentioned some of the challenges and some of the key questions for ABJ, but it was very great to get some of the insights on how do you track progress with regard to all the things that you mentioned as well.
Yeah. So there are multiple ways I would talk about both in terms of the tools that we use, as well as I can talk about in terms of the governance structure that we have. In terms of the tools we use, we use Enablon as a data management system. So all our sites input into Enablon the amount of energy and then the nature of that energy. So energy matrix, so how much is coming from which type of fuel, primary fuel source, and whether it's electrical or thermal. So use of Enablon, and therefore Enablon's metrics module and performance is tracked through that. And the Enablon data is discussed at multiple levels, at the site level itself, at the business corporate level, through, if I was to use example of Hindalco, there is a monthly APEC sustainability meeting, which is chaired by the managing director. And this information, whether it's on energy usage per se, so therefore the amount of energy used and then the type of energy used. So at those levels, and then even at the group level, consolidated that how we are doing. This is just those sheer numbers, and then also converting the type of energy, the initiatives that we are taking in terms of GHG absolute numbers and GHG intensity, and then tracking it against the detailed decarbonization roadmap that is in place. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Diksha. And I would also, perhaps it would be great to hear the insights from Hendrik and the CLP group on this, because you mentioned that the company is moving fast on the SDGs and that you have a clear vision for 2050. But could we also ask you, Hendrik, how is CLP tracking progress to ensure that it is on track on its targets and objective for 2050?
Yeah, no, thanks for letting me jump in here. We've set a climate vision. We call it our Climate Vision 2050. We've had that in place since 2007. And we've been ratcheting up our targets ever since. And the primary tracker that we utilize is the carbon intensity of the electricity that we send to our customers. We have just released an updated version of our Climate Vision in late September. And it is very much in line with, just like many other companies, setting a net zero target for 2050. But more importantly, or perhaps equally important, it is about bringing a detailed plan for what happens in between now and 2050. How we are actually going to achieve this over the next 30 years or 29 years, where we have set ourselves as interim targets for 2030 and 2040 in line with a well below 2 degree trajectory. And our 2030 target also being validated by SBTi. Now, that in itself sort of maps out the road, the pathway, and we have a number of pieces that need to move in our portfolio in between them. Between then and now, and it is the short term in particular where we have a heavy focus on phasing out coal. And one of our biggest plants that we operate in Australia will be, we actually accelerated that phase out by over 4 years, which we announced earlier this year. And that was only doable in collaboration with government. With the government in Australia, and also by being focused on really facilitating renewable energy coming to the fore and building or committing to build energy storage facilities on the same site where we had previously, or where we continue to operate at the moment, our coal power plant. So there's a real important piece sort of that we keep in mind as we decarbonize. It is about being very realistic in terms of what we can do. What can we do instead of having coal? And if I can just further illustrate, here in Hong Kong, we have still a coal power plant in operation, but we have a transition plan in place where we are switching away from utilizing coal towards natural gas. And we see this as an interim measure, as part of the energy transition. And we fund some of this very large investment as part with our energy transition bonds, actually, that we issue, that are independently verified to meet criteria that we've defined under our climate action finance framework. And that in itself sets us up over time, having gas facilities or combined cycle turbines in place that we can then over time, as we move to 2050, to switch to hydrogen, green hydrogen. So we really have that vision, and we are very clear at the moment, there is no such supply of green hydrogen in the market that we can buy at prices that are equal to what we currently would spend on natural gas. We are supportive of building out this pipeline of this infrastructure. And we actually just collaborated with Wbcsd for COP26 on a hydrogen pledge, together with several other members of the Wbcsd, to really showcase we have demand. We can switch some of our facilities already today, and progressively so over time, to run on zero carbon or green or low carbon hydrogen. But we need the infrastructure in place. So again, we need collaboration across industry, but also across government to facilitate this change.
Thank you very much, Hendrik, for this insight. It's actually a very good point, and also a good transition for Vicky. So, as the WBA is notably leading a regular climate and energy benchmark, can you tell us a bit more about your work to help companies inform their strategy in the electric utility sector, and maybe also ask you, how do you think that the benchmarking exercise can support companies in tracking progress while scaling up their SDG contribution?
Yeah, thank you, Florian, and thank you for inviting me today. Happy to share. For the ones that don't know, the World Benchmarking Alliance, or WBA in short, we are a global non-for-profit, and we look at the private sector's contribution to reaching the Sustainable Development Goals. And we do so to really create an accountability mechanism for the private sector. So like you say, tracking progress, holding companies and private sector to account is something that we do through our benchmark, but also with the support of our global alliance. So as you asked around what is collaborative action, this is really where our alliance comes in, with currently over 260 organizations that support our work, including Wbcsd, for which we're very grateful, in really helping us developing what should that accountability mechanism actually measure. And then once it's measured, how do we drive collective action on the needed ambition and performance that we want to see. So as you already mentioned in your introduction, the climate and energy work that I represent is a part of the overall work that we do. And we actually look at the high emitting sectors and how they are decarbonizing in line with the Paris Agreement. And we do so by using a methodology called Assessing Low Carbon Transition, ACT in short. And this really looks at not only the past emissions, but really looks at what is the company doing in the present and in the near future. And as Hendrik already said, it really looks at the transition planning ahead, what is needed for a company to really be aligned with a 1.5 degree pathway, and then translates this back into what do we then expect in terms of short, medium, and long-term actions and performance? For the electric utility sector, we've looked at 50 most influential companies. How we look at it, most influential is looking into geographical presence, but also assets portfolio, as well as what are these companies profile in the supply chains. So the 50 companies are listed on our website, so you can look into the names. And we've assessed their performance last year, and we are actually currently in the final stages of looking into how much progress these companies have made. And by next week, on the 24th, we will publish a full updated benchmark on the electric utility sector. But of course, I can already share a little bit without going into the details of maybe individual companies. So Hendrik, don't worry, I won't mention anything on CLP, but I can give you some guidance on where we think that the biggest changes we've seen so far is and as you, sorry, to first answer your question, how can it help companies? We really want this accountability mechanism to look at the company's individual assessments, but then of course also into their regional assessments, and then in terms of what does that mean in terms of a global scope. So we aim that these assessments are a roadmap for the companies to understand, okay, what is the trend, what do we see as a trend going forward, and hopefully inform them on strategic guidance. But then also it's not only meant for the private sector, because it is indeed a collaborative action. So we need also that this information and these benchmarks inform other stakeholders like public policymakers, like the investor and finance community, as well as civil society, to be informed about what are the findings and independent research showing us using scientific input, and then the data that we have from the companies, and what does that mean in terms of next steps into truly accelerating on these efforts. As I said, we see that by next week we will show the full benchmark, where we have used the 1.5 degrees, so the most ambitious scenario that we want to see for these high emitting sectors. Of course, translating this back to where a company is located, because geographical presence is important, where of course a European electric utility will need to show a faster decarbonization than, for example, utility based in Asia. We've seen that the electric utility sector has of course, they've started the decarbonization before other sectors. And of course, we also see that there's been the most advanced and mature technologies already available. So we also have set high expectations for this sector to really drive the transformation, because we also believe that there's other sectors that are depending on this sector to decarbonize in a well below 1.5 degree, or in a 1.5 degree way. So overall, we see that there's an improved performance compared to the last time that we've benchmarked of the overall sector. So we do see that there's really a positive trend there. But because we are using a more ambitious scenario, being the 1.5 degree scenario, we also see that not all companies, or at least only a small section of the 50 companies have actually set their targets in line with the 1.5 degree scenario. So we really definitely need to see a step up in ambition there. So again, I won't go into all the details of the findings, but we really believe that there is strong potential for this sector to be the leading sector in the decarbonization, and that other sectors can leverage on the learnings that we've seen from the electric utility sector. And then one last comment I wanted to make on this is that during COP last week and the week before, we've also published our just transition assessments, and I think it's important to mention, because of the role of other stakeholders in that, is that of course the decarbonization needs to go hand in hand with a just and equitable transition, looking after the impact on workers and communities. And in this, there is a responsibility for the companies to make transparent what that impact is, and then in order to be able to mobilize other stakeholders' actions in that. So I'll leave it with that, and happy to go further in detail.
Thank you very much, Vicky. That is a lot of information that you have shared with us. It's very interesting to see the importance of collaboration, and also to see how companies track their performance. But in parallel, we also want to address basically the need for financing. So before Ishan said that financing is not easy, but perhaps now I would turn to you again, Ishan. So finance is basically a key enabler for the transition that Diksha, Hendrik, and Vicky mentioned, that is aligned as well with the SDGs. And we know that the IFC is in that regard a strong supporter because it provides active financial support for renewable energy projects, especially in emerging markets. So I just want to ask you, does IFC favor financing utilities whose operation and strategies are in line with the SDGs? And basically also, what are the ways in which IFC measures performance of utilities to measure the sustainability? Could you please elaborate this with the help of an example of financing, that, for instance, on the project that you are working now?
Yeah, sure. So let me take, it might be 2 minutes. I will take on this one. So first of all, indicators wise, how do we measure? So it for internal, I will say the work structure in IFC is we do projects in 3 approaches. In mature market, sometimes it might be towards direct investment. For example, if we are doing a project in Myanmar, so we don't go directly with the larger investment, but we create the project. Okay, so we have made an investment last year in Myanmar that was on this telecom company, and especially the utility where we have made investment. It was supplying power to those telecom consumers, and the requirement was 99.999% availability. So their approach is, our approach is slightly different because we initiate projects with a few pilots and then we scale up and then we made the mainstream investment. This is the one story, the way we have structured. But if we are doing, because country specific, the size of investment and size of projects are different. If we are targeting some solar or some wind project in India, so unlikely we will see that 5 megawatt, 10 megawatt capacity. Now token size, as I mentioned earlier, that is much larger. But if you look from KPI point of view, those are across the countries are same. Our priorities are basically low income countries, IDA countries, FCS countries, but end of the day, when our projects are evaluated in terms of the indicators and what we internally define, so the development indicators. So whether we are starting an advisory project, whether we are doing an upstream project or mainstream, it's investment project, our key KPIs are defined on impacts, outcome, and output. And those things are very, very clear. So if we are talking in terms of some megawatt, back to back with some megawatt hour, back to back with some GHG footprint, back to back with some energy access, it is linked with the genders also. So all dimensions are there. And it will surprise when even in a project, when we are doing on-site consultation or organizing a conference, so we collect the information, how many women participants are there. Okay. So from up to that level, basically, we do the project assessment. It's not only the disbursement or mobilization. It is basically backside if we are talking about SDG targets. So we need to comply with all. So these all aspects actually we cover in the project. So whenever we start any project, so the way I understood this market and SDG is the SDG practices in power segment are well established, especially in commercial markets like India, China. The only aspect is making sure their applicability and coverage in the respective KPIs. And as I mentioned, we are very much concerned about the development impact. So from development impacts point of view, project or investment could be measured against indicators, but we follow impacts, output, and outcomes. And these are basically with respect of how much capacity, how much financing and mobilization we have done, how much GHG mitigation has happened. And see the project, the development impacts might be direct or indirect. If we are doing investment directly in a mainstream project, we can take some time and measure that, okay, out of 1 year time, how much energy it actually fed into grid. And accordingly, we will claim that it was the direct impact. So within our X amount of money, this much carbon footprint has been removed. But there might be a PPP project like we have done in Madhya Pradesh, Reva project, which is supplying power to DMRC Delhi. So this was a PPP project. So there, in those kind of project, it may happen that, okay, our role is limited to the bid out of the project. And once project is actually coming on the ground, it may, because that execution duration is not in our hand. So that point of time, we can track the project and define those are indirect indicators. But the basic definitions of indicators will be same in both of the cases. This is the way we follow. Prima facie, if you ask from what type of challenges we are facing, so I will say being in this sector since around 2 decades. So I prima facie not feel any specific challenge in order to track the SDGs. So no specific challenges, especially in electrical utility side, as our investment practices are well aligned towards SDGs, as I mentioned earlier. At inception stage, each specific project, either advisory or upstream, because I'm specifically mentioning this advisory because our idea is basically to replicate the best practices from mature market to emerging markets. So if you might heard about scaling solar, that is basically IFC's the own concept. So if any country is seeking that, okay, in India or China, solar tariffs are very low, but same somebody is expecting in Zambia or Namibia, that might not be possible. Then we intervene and then we structure the project there and see that how this could be leveraged and how private sector participation could be ensured in the project. So our targets are basically climate, clean energy, gender, those in line with SDG targets are there. So once, and this is the key thing for our internal assessment, once a project is completed, our IEG measures the project in line with the predefined impacts and rates accordingly. So if our project is successful, then only those targets will be added up into our overall KPIs. If any dimension is failed, see, mobilization has done, transaction has done, but it is not meeting what we have committed. For example, we are losing energy access. Whatever number we have identified, it is not there. Okay, and four dimensions are met. It might be called partially successful. And then our overall KPIs will not consider that. And now recently a new development is there. So now in projects, we are also supposed to address AIIM. So this is anticipated impact measurement and monitoring. This is the third layer beyond the additionality. So this is measured again the competitiveness, resilience, integration, inclusiveness, sustainability, multiple parameters are there. So we need to ensure those things, and then once we are completing the project, that point of time we can go to IG group and see that whether this is successful or not successful. But I will conclude with this one, that whatever projects we have done, as I mentioned that in energy segment, around 55% portfolio belongs to solar and followed by gas and then wind. We are totally in RE, we are totally in clean energy, and we can't go with the coal. So first of all, our commitment is already there in line with the SDG. We are totally committed to clean energy. Now, the second point, what I'm saying that our overall portfolio is giving us whatever predicted results we have from investment point of view, from impacts point of view. So none of the project we have find any NPA or those kind of things, even in the emerging markets. So this is on a nutshell our overall approach. But we have a common methodology of assessing the projects and measuring the projects across all type of markets. And this gives us basically, I would say, the confidence of replicating best practices to emerging markets. I hope I was able to answer your question.
Thank you very much, Ishan. It was actually very insightful, and you emphasize on the role of and the importance of replicating the best practices, and actually showcase as well the value of collaboration. Because if we collaborate, we can also enhance this best practice sharing, and then it will also lift everyone's contribution upstairs. So perhaps now I could just quickly turn to Vicky. Vicky, just that around this table, we all share the view that business has a critical role to play as a force for good for the SDGs. But they can also play an essential role of financing the transformation needed. We get the perspective from Ishan and the IFC. Now, perhaps on WBA side, how can the SDGs and the benchmarking exercise that you are leading can help companies in informing their financing decisions? And in parallel, how can companies' performance help them, for instance, in the benchmark that you are leading, can help them in harnessing new financing opportunities to support the transitions?
Yeah, thank you. And I think there's two sides, like you said, to this question. So on the one hand, I want to answer the question around how do we make sure that there is complete insights into what are the financing needs to support this transition, and then also what are the risks, right? I think there's two parts to that. One of the things that we look at when we do the benchmarking is are these companies really doing scenario planning? Are they really looking into what are the impacts of the various scenarios from a financial risk perspective? What we see is there's still a long way to go in order to get complete transparency around what the impacts of these various scenarios are. So we definitely encourage companies to really be transparent around what are the financial plannings that have to go hand in hand with these transition scenario planning, to really make sure that the funds and the financing available can be allocated or directed to support this transition. I think another point is around the capex that is needed in order to support this transition. We see that for the electric utility sector, and in order to align with the 1.5 degree scenario, we need companies to spend 78% of their capex to support the low carbon transition. And the electric utility sector is not alone in that, but transparency around which percentage of the capex really is supporting the low carbon transition, that is really something that needs to mature further. We definitely see a push from the finance community, and whether or not that's regulatory driven out of Europe or from an investor more global perspective, is that there will be a big push in order to get further transparency around this capex piece. So that is one hand. And I think on the second part is how can this help channel financing to support these companies is one of the things that we have launched at COP was also a collective impact coalition, which is a very fancy name, but really to drive collective action from different stakeholders. But the one that we've launched has significant investor backing to really drive impact and improvement on the benchmarking in the coming 2 years. So this collective impact coalition comes together and agrees upon which indicators the collective wants to see improvement over the coming periods. And we definitely see that then this can help companies to make it transparent of where they need other stakeholder support, because they can't do it all by themselves. But it is the responsibility to make that insightful and then be in active dialogue with the various parties and stakeholders. And I think that this will benefit companies to really make it from a standardized perspective and from a methodology perspective, be quite clear on how they can transparently report on this, but then be also compare themselves where they are at with other stakeholders, and then be able to also show that if the improvement is there, and if indeed they show that their scoring on their assessments year on year is improving, then this will also help unlocking further financial support in order to achieve the overall goal.
Thank you very much, Vicky. This was a very, very insightful on your side. And actually it's a perfect transition to our last question. And for this, I will turn to Diksha and Hendrik. But just perhaps on the companies, it would be great to get companies' perspectives on and recommendation on how better collaboration with stakeholders and with sector peers can help them to achieve the SDGs. So Diksha, could you share with us insights and any recommendations that you may have on how enhanced collaboration with these stakeholders, with these suppliers, can help Aditya Birla and your company in accelerating the sustainable, circular, and inclusive transition?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And if I was to pick up one key way in which we can address these very multi-dimensional, larger-than-life problems that we are facing today, whether it's the whole issue of climate change, inequality, and various other mega trends which have got further accentuated with the pandemic. The sheer size and spread of these issues is so large that no one can go alone in it. So the key is collaboration, and which is why, and collaboration in various ways with different stakeholders. And I can just share a couple of examples on how we are therefore looking at collaborating with different kinds of stakeholders as Aditya Birla Group. One is working with the industry peers. So, for example, our cement company, Ultratech, is a founding member of Global Cement and Concrete Association. And coming together with cement manufacturers across the globe to say, what are the common problems facing us and what could we do about it? Whether it's in terms of finding innovative solutions or the kind of policy advocacy that you need. Similarly, our aluminium company Hindalco is working with the International Aluminium Institute, or our textile value chain companies like Birla Cellulose, Aditya Birla Fashion and Retail, working through through Sustainable Apparel Coalition, Fashion for Good. So that's one way where you come together as sector peers and work on it. Second way is to through a body like Wbcsd. We've been members of Wbcsd, and there are issues which are sector agnostic. So therefore, how do you recognize whether it's in terms of framework, etc. And thirdly, it's also by the way of, so how do you feed into some of these? So then it is about internal collaboration. And what we do for that is that for these material ESG issues, which we see at the Aditya Birla Group level, we formed what we're calling working groups. So whether it's on decarbonization, which is a cross-business, cross-functional working group, because if you want to work on decarbonization, you need to get your technology team together, you need to get your sales and marketing team together, you need to get your procurement guys together, you need to get your operations guys in that same room. So therefore, picking up this thing, or for that matter, if we are looking at circularity, which is coming up as a common theme for our different businesses, whether it's in terms of products that we make, for example, Continua as a brand, which we've launched as our carbon black business, which is carbon black made from used tires. Or it is almost 60% of the aluminium that our downstream aluminium company Novelis uses is recycled aluminium. So again, we have a group of colleagues coming in together, working on circularity, whether it's the smaller loops, so Ultratech using the red mud that gets generated in Hindalco, or sharing of experiences of working in reverse logistics. How do you set up recycling units? How do you engage with policymakers? If we are saying that decarbonization, for decarbonizing Novelis, recycling is the key lever, then where, in which geographies, which are the way regulations are playing out, which makes it easier to get this reverse logistics going, planning the capex cycle accordingly, etc. So these are some ways in which, collaborating with peers, with internal different cross-functional, cross-business working groups are two examples that I thought I could share here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Disha. And perhaps I can quickly turn to Hendrik for the 2 minutes we have left. Hendrik, could you have, if you have to boil it down to a few remarks, what would you say as recommendation to engage with stakeholders?
Yeah, I mean, if you really think about it, if you boil it down to it, when you run a company, when you provide a service, when you go out there and really deliver a product to customers, you have to collaborate across the industry, across specialists, across experts, across the communities, across the customers that are supposed to buy your product. So fundamentally, I think it's about engaging with stakeholders that are aligned with your own view. And in our case, as CLP, the view being we need to decarbonize fast. And this is why I appreciate so much the work that the likes of Vicky are doing on the World Benchmarking Alliance. It's about setting a benchmark of what does it mean when we talk about net zero? What does it mean when we talk about decarbonization for electric utilities? How do we measure that? And if there's a specific ranking for this sector that we're in, it helps us really reflect in terms of what are we doing, and then we get the finance people to come in and support us, because we can showcase to them, yes, this is where we're at, and we acknowledge this is where we're at, and we have work to do, but we are on the right path. And that's also part of that, a benchmarking that's done. It's providing some indication of where is this company heading, this organization heading in terms of net zero and decarbonization. So it provides some perspective, and that in itself then it allows us to also then go back to our regulators and to the various stakeholders that we need to work with our business partners. This is what we need to do. We need green hydrogen. How are we going to get this? This is what we want to do. This is what our investors want us to do. This is what our regulators want to do. How do we deliver this? This is our pathway, and we can communicate clearly in this space. And the ranking that the World Benchmarking Alliance does is tough. It's like Vicky said, there's only very few companies get a high score. It's tough, but it's fair, and we need to do more. And all of us need to understand what it takes to do more and where the gaps are. So this is where I see collaboration really coming to the fore: is how do we close these gaps?
Thank you very much, Enrique, and thank you very much, Diksha. When we talk a lot about collaboration, especially the Wbcsd and with the roadmap, and it's great to see, and it's great to hear from you, because we want to get concrete insights on how this collaboration is taking shape, and we understand that all the challenges that are lying ahead, but are also coupled with opportunities. So the more you do, the more opportunities you can unlock in the future. So this session is coming to an end. So unfortunately, we won't have time to address any questions. But I'm quickly looking at the Q&A and the chat. I don't see any questions. So perhaps I would just, on behalf of the Wbcsd, Joe and the India team, thank you, every one of you. Thank you, Diksha, Hendrik, Ishan, and Vicky for your insights. It has been quite an inspiring conversation. And as we are reaching a juncture for sustainable development, the sense of urgency to take action is even more pressing. So it's very encouraging to see these companies and to get the insights from Vicky and Ishan to see that actually there's a movement that is taking shape and that is accelerating, and that we need to build on this momentum to accelerate the action. So thank you very much to every one of you. And now I should hand over to Joe.
Thank you very much, Florian, and a big thanks to everyone on that panel, another excellent panel. Now, we've just 15 minutes left, and I'm going to ask Vaishnavi Prabhakaran to sum up the discussion we've had today and what the main takeaways are. Vaishnavi is Group Head for Communications and Sustainability at the Tata Power Company, and she's got experience right across the business, from business development, strategy, branding, communication, and sustainability. So Vaishnavi, if you would be so kind as to share your takeaways from sum up discussion, the discussion we've had today.
Thank you very much indeed. Wow, what a day it has been. A big thank you to everyone who made time for thought-provoking discussions and engagement. Starting the discussion on the global virtual meet with the genesis of the SDG Roadmap for electric utilities, Joe and James from World Business Council for Sustainable Development set the tone for action orientation for progress on SDG goals. Dr. Sinha, CEO and MD, Tata Power, talked about the journey to become the utility of the future and the 3D approach of decarbonization, decentralized distributed generation, and digitalization, and how engaging consumers is a key part to enabling this transformation. Dr. Patil, Collector Ratnagiri, brought in a rich context from a planning and development perspective and areas on which collective action is anticipated. Dr. Viva Devon, Director General Terry, juxtaposed SDG action from developed and developing nations and highlighted the role of large private entities on sustainability. Shlokanath, Head of Sustainability Policy and Advocacy for Tata Trust and Acting CEO of India Climate Collaborative, urged for global collective action and stressed on the importance of partnerships beyond sectoral boundaries and innovation in achievement of SDG goals. The panel discussion with Eduardo Mora from Enel, Mikel Latero from Acciona, Vinay Pritish from JSW Energy, and Dr. Ganesh Das from CAISC, moderated by Jyoti Bansal, talked about the transition path and conscious business choices that would lead the way to accelerated action on achievement of the SDG goals. Following immediately was the stimulating panel discussion on importance of collective action for power utilities. Hearing from Hendrik Rosenthal from CLP, Diksha Vats from Aditya Birla Group, Ishan Purohit from IFC, and Vicky Sens from World Benchmarking Alliance brought out beautifully the challenges and opportunities to stay on track for SDG goals in the panel moderated by Florian Miko. We firmly believe that the scintillating conversations and collective understanding from today's global virtual meet has paved a strong foundation for the next stage of an India chapter for the SDG Roadmap for electric utilities. I will be failing in my responsibilities if I miss thanking the wonderful group of participants who have posted some very pertinent questions and brought out excellent nuances in the topics for today. Thank you very much indeed. And now, over to Florian for wrapping up the session with a call to action and next steps.
Thanks, Vaishnavi. I'm going to do it on behalf of Florian and everyone. So first of all, a really big thank you to Tata Power for the impetus and energy to organize today, and also to ERM for helping us to organize the event. And thanks to everyone who has been online asking questions, and to all of the speakers today. So the products are only as good as what you do with them. And we've produced, when I say we, 11 of the world's leading utility companies have produced an excellent roadmap for the SDGs. Now, it's really important we remember this is everyone's agenda. So from school kids to companies to cities to nations, the SDGs are our common framework. Our members have committed to reviewing progress by 2026 and updating the roadmap if needed, which is fantastic. But success relies on leadership and on collaborative action. And that's what we've heard about from all the panelists today. And the roadmap sets out 7 impact opportunities with related actions, and all of them need inclusive partnerships and collaborations with sector peers and other stakeholders, like academia, where we've heard from today, civil society, the value chain, to raise awareness, for companies to exchange on solutions and challenges, and move the roadmap into action mode. And I really commend Tata Power for the leadership they've shown in convening the discussion today to engage more of you, the audience, in this agenda. And this work really needs to continue. So if you're from an electric utility and you want to help accelerate this, please get in touch. At Wbcsd, we're working to identify the right platform to get electric utilities, on a common platform. What's the right vehicle for that? And we hope to have this in shape by early next year. So if you want to be involved, please do write to us. And then also, I would say it's very, there's a great opportunity for you to leverage Wbcsd projects. So in this discussion today, we've heard from a lot of Wbcsd member companies, and they're each leveraging projects through Wbcsd aligned with this agenda, such as in energy transformations like electrical storage or low carbon hydrogen, mobility decarbonization, which came up in some of the questions. There's a business commission to tackle inequality, and we heard a lot about the importance of a just transition, for example. And there's a CFO network that helps businesses to position their transitions to financial markets. And these projects are helping Wbcsd members to accelerate this agenda. So if you're from a company that wants to take a leadership position, do please get in touch about membership as well as this SDG roadmap. Okay, so a real credit to all the panelists and the moderators. We've claimed back the time that we lost at the start, and we're going to finish just a few minutes early. So a really big thanks to every person who's contributed today, and to all of you who've listened. Thank you very much, and we'll end there.
Recording stopped.